Well, thanks for coming here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I, as I said, I really enjoy your show.
So for people that don't know, can you kind of give us a summary of your background in the government, working with the Bush administration, and then getting into like finance and all this stuff?
So I grew up in Philadelphia, and I got very interested as a child I got very interested in money and why everybody was destroying everything on the theory that somehow that made them money. And so I decided I was going to understand how all the money worked in a neighborhood. And what I didn't understand till I went to Wall Street is you literally have to know how all the money on the planet works to understand how the money in a U.S. neighborhood works. Because it's organized, it's very centralized, and it's organized so that, so if you and I go to the White House, it'll say, here's how all the money works in housing, here's how all the money works in military. But it doesn't say, here's how the money works, in West Philadelphia. So you can't, now with relational databases, you could, and I've worked on that. But anyway, so I went to Wall Street because I wanted to learn how all the money, the planet works. And I went from sort of department to department to department, learning all the different markets. And then I figured out, it's all being rigged from Washington. It's the Treasury and the Fed. So I got to go to Washington. So I went to Washington. I was a partner at a firm called Dillon Read. And in fact, I have an online book called Dillon Read and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits about it's a case study in the intersection between organized crime and Wall Street and Washington. Anyway, so I went to Washington in the first Bush administration to be Assistant Secretary of Housing. And it's the Federal Housing Commissioner. And that's the person who oversees all the mortgage markets, both the credit, most of the credit, and then the rules and regulation. So, and I ran smack into all the mortgage corruption because a lot of the black budget is financed with mortgage fraud. And anyway, so I left, but I discovered the internet when I was in the administration. And so I created an investment bank that could use software tools basically to get all the information about how the money works and make it accessible to neighborhoods. So anyway, but my company, I started a company called Hamilton Securities Group. It was very successful. And we got hired on competitive bid by the Clinton administration. So I worked in the Bush administration, but we got hired by the Clinton administration to be financial advisor for the FHA. And we led $10 billion of mortgage auctions trying to stop the mortgage fraud. Which was, they had other ideas. They wanted to take the mortgage fraud the other way so we could have the financial crisis. Anyway, so I ended up in 11 years of litigation with the federal government, with the Department of Justice. Have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State? With Will Smith?
It's been a long time, yeah.
I played Will Smith in real life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I played Will Smith in real life. So we had 18 audits and investigations, 12 tracks of litigation, physical harassment, a smear campaign. It was right out of the movies. And of course, so Will Smith is a successful attorney. And in fact, his office in the movie is right next to where my office was, our company office was in Washington. And, everything's crazy and the world makes sense until he finds Gene Hackman, who's a former NSA employee, who explains how covert operations work. And in fact, now if you come to the Solari Report, we have a whole 12-part series called Deep State Tactics. So if you can't find Gene, you can listen to Deep State Tactics and understand how it all works. Anyway, but I got a real crash course. I'll never forget. First time I saw Enemy of the State, I'm like up in the front row, and I'm like, oh, it's my training movie.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing. So when you talk about the mortgage fraud, what specifically do you mean, and how does that work?
So financial fraud and mortgage fraud is like the joy of cooking. There are thousands of recipes, right? But if you want to know the most prominent, likely famous recipe for mortgage fraud and HUD housing, all you have to do is look up the Tony Soprano TV show did a series of 4 parts on HUD fraud by Tony Soprano.
Really?
Yes. And the basic, and it's interesting because one of the things that got me interested in money is it was this fraud that destroyed the value of homes in my neighborhood when I was a little girl. We had 4 boarded up, foreclosed properties catty corner to our block in West Philadelphia, and it had a huge sign, and it said, by order of the Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. And I used to think, who is that asshole. And so when I was sworn in, they said, by order of the president, you are now the Assistant Secretary of Housing. I thought, I'm the, and I went downstairs and I said, how many boarded up homes? How many foreclosed properties do we have in the foreclosed industry? My deputy said 50,000. I said, well, that's going to change. And that was part of the problem. But okay, so let's look at the basic fraud.
Okay.
So there's a home in the foreclosed property inventory of the Federal Housing Administration. They had financed a mortgage. They put an insurance policy on the mortgage, so they take the credit risk. It defaults. They pay off the mortgage holder, and then take back the property. So the property's sitting there in inventory. Okay. So let's say the property's worth $100,000.
So like when you find a house for sale on HUD auction, that's the situation.
Yes, probably.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Probably. Okay. So let's say the house is worth $100,000. Okay. You sell the house to someone, or you who's going to do sort of a quickie fix up. Okay. And you let them turn around and sell it at you put a mortgage. Let's say it's worth $150 now. They've fixed it up. Mm-hmm. You put a mortgage on it for $250, a lot more than it's worth.
Right.
Okay. They sell it to a not-for-profit who immediately defaults. Right. You pay off the $250 mortgage and take the property back, and you keep doing it again and again and again, mm-hmm. and generating lots of money out the back door. So when I became FHA commissioner, we would find one property in Chicago which had financed and defaulted 5 times in 1 year.
Wow.
I know. You can imagine that. Anyway, but here's how I can make even more money.
I had a friend who did this. Not a friend. He was a guy who came in. He was one of my first guests on the podcast, and he was buying up houses in Tampa, and he was taking them and getting his friend to go do appraisals on them and like marking the appraisal up by like 5x,
right.
and then getting loans on it.
Right. That's sort of that's a variation. Now, mm-hmm. Here's how you really make a lot of money. When you issue the mortgage, you don't issue one mortgage, you issue 10 mortgages on that house, and you put them in a mortgage pool that's wrapped by Ginnie Mae so you can sell them in Dubai, and nobody knows the difference, right? Oh. Right. And as long as there's money, you can skim out the back door of the FHA fund, no problem.
Wow.
Right. And it's really funny. So I had warned people about this kind of fraud, both when I was assistant secretary and then when I was the lead financial advisor. But you know what it's like when you fight these winds, and mm-hmm. and so I'm driving down the highway in Georgia, and my old roommate from college calls me and she says, "Fitz, have you seen the Soprano TV shows? They have the HUD frauds on the Soprano TV shows." And she said, "I guess you're telling the truth." And I said, wait a minute. So I was the former Assistant Secretary of Housing, and then I was the lead financial advisor for HUD. And I've told you about this for years. You don't believe me until it's on the Soprano TV show. And she said, that's right. So I said, that's why I say in America, fact is fiction and fiction is fact. If it's on the news, it's likely fiction. You know, if it's on the Soprano TV show, there's a...
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're getting your training film.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Well, remember, during the financial crisis, within a very short period of time, there was more money shoveling out the door. I mean, the TARP IG said total money the taxpayers financed is $27 trillion. $8 trillion would have paid off all the single-family mortgages in the country, right? So the total bailout of the mortgage fraud was 3 times all existing mortgages in the country.
That's bananas.
So one of my favorite quotes, I was told by a former intelligence officer who was involved in the financial fraud that Oliver North had said that HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. And based on what I cleaned up and what I dealt with, I'm absolutely convinced
HUD was the candy store of covert revenues. That is...
Well,
that's got a nice ring to it.
HUD's missing just from its financial statements $1 trillion from 1998 to 2015. So that's my whole thing about the missing money, which Catherine is that's one of those issues Catherine won't let go of. It keeps banging.
Okay, so can you explain to me, and I know you've done this well on other shows, but how does the banking system work? I know everybody thinks about how like the bankers control the world. It's like it's the bankers, the intelligence agencies, and the money washing with the drug cartels and all this stuff with funding, wars and overthrowing countries. And there's so much going on here. But at the very top level of all of this stuff is the bankers, right?
Right. So here's how any business, any enterprise, and any planet has a business model, an economic model on how the fundamental walk. So the Western world for 500 plus years has operated on a model called central banking warfare model. Okay. The central bankers print money out of thin air, and I'm grossly oversimplifying, but they create the money, and then the military makes sure that people take it. Okay. And that keeps the liquidity going. So there are two sides to the coin. And when you say military, think intelligence and military, because surveillance is such an important part of the force. So you literally have the bankers running monetary policy, but then you have the military and intelligence backing it up. And you need both. It's like two hands of one coin. It's like two sides of a coin. Okay.
Right.
And what the bankers do, you grew up in the United States. Most people listening to this grew up in the Western world. And we've had for over a century a model where the bankers run monetary policy and then the people's representatives run fiscal policy. So the whole basis of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. That means the people's representatives, the Congress or the state legislature, run the fiscal policy is the way it's supposed to be. And what has happened in America for the last 20 years is we've had what I call a financial coup d'etat, where the bankers decided we can't trust the people and the people's representatives to manage the fiscal side. So we're going to change the model and we're going to take over control of both monetary and fiscal. And of course, if that succeeds, and it's gone very far, but it's not all the way. So let's say we've gone 70% of the way, we have 30 more to go. If that happens, then we lose the ability to determine taxation. In other words, we get no representation. If they want the money, they just take it out of our accounts.
Could you explain for a third grader what fiscal policy means?
Sure.
And what monetary policy means?
It's monetary policy means I get to create the currency. Fiscal policy means I get to collect and spend the taxes.
Okay. Got it.
So let's look how your federal government works. Your federal government, grossly oversimplified, gets about half of its money to, fix the roads and do and run the military. And it gets the money by half of the money from taxing. So we all pay federal taxes. We all have fees, various fines, whatever.
Half the money comes from the taxes and half from where?
Half comes from the central bank.
Okay, got it.
The central banking mechanism right now, the currency is issued with debt. It doesn't have to be, but it is. So the New York Fed, so the Treasury, your bank account as a citizen is the New York Fed is the depository for your bank account. Okay. So they are the federal government's bankers. The Treasury account is at the New York Fed and its members' banks. So the New York Fed is owned by its members, but they also act as agent. So you're going to have the largest banks in the country owning and directing the New York Fed, choosing its president, but also, doing depository functions for the Treasury. So they, as agent, are also doing various things for the Treasury. Okay. So they have a function called primary dealer. And a primary dealer is authorized to go borrow money using Treasury bonds and bills. So they borrow money. So that's sort of part of how the currency gets into existence. And they put it in the Treasury bank account. So half comes from taxes and half comes from borrowing, a lot of that coming from your retirement account or my pension fund.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So our retirement fund, or it could be a Norwegian pension fund or sovereign wealth fund, are buying Treasury bonds and the money's going into the bank account. And that's where half comes from, which is why if you're the president of the United States, it's like getting an allowance from dad. If you don't do what dad wants, you're not going to get your allowance. Right? You don't have sovereignty. You don't have financial sovereignty. And you don't have information sovereignty because you, as the president, can't have a private telephone call. You got 17 intelligence agencies.
Even
listening.
the president.
Yeah, especially the president.
Especially the
They'd
president.
much rather know what he's saying than you or I was saying, right?
I guess that's true.
Right. Okay.
Wow.
Right. So how are you going to run a government if you don't have information sovereignty and you don't have financial sovereignty? How are you going to do that?
That's a good question. What do you think?
So have you heard my red button story?
I wore Chubby's classic line swim trunks to the beach this weekend, and boy, am I loving their fabric. It's so smooth and stretchy, and my favorite part is the built-in boxer brief liner. These aren't grade school trunks. It's trunks the way they should be. They mold with the shapes of my legs when I move, and I've never felt so comfortable in a pair of swim trunks in my life. Men, your thighs need air. They've been trapped in pants all winter long. Yes, they are pale, but they are still strong and ready for the ultimate thigh liberation. I'm talking about the lined swim collection from Chubby's. Swim trunks so comfy and modern that it has to be technology reverse engineered from a UFO. I'm talking wild prints that are so fun, the trunks themselves will get the party started. And liners that prevent chafing and uncomfortable pinches because it has a 4-directional stretch. This is what I mean when I say you've never felt trunks like this before. It's like ancient Greek technology that we've only recently rediscovered and put directly into these pants specifically. Who knew those naughty Greeks knew comfort? You'll want to squeeze out as many beach days as possible with the Chubby's classic line swim collection. Don't make a splash. Make waves of confidence and compliments when you show off those unique wonders of summer joy. And you can get the same amount of comfort on the streets with the Chubby's Everywhere shorts. Use the code Danny for 20% off at chubbysshorts.com. When you're getting dressed for your workday, a workout, or a weekend getaway, Chubby's has you covered. For a limited time only, Chubby's is giving our viewers 20% off your order with our code Danny, D-A-N-N-Y, at chubbysshorts.com. That's code Danny at CHUBBIESSHORTS.com. Support our show and tell them we sent you. Don't blend in with the crowd. Stand out with Chubby's. I believe I've heard your red button story. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what the red button story says is, since the American people want their check, they don't want you to say no to, the people who control the monetary. They want to keep So we are, the United States is a global leader in global money laundering and organized crime money.
Okay.
We're the global leader. And if that money stops, the red button story, and you can find it on the internet if you want to listen to it, but the red button story is people were not willing to push a red button to stop the organized crime flows because they wanted their checks to keep coming. So we have a financial dependency as a society on things, doing things that harm other people, including our own children, our own selves. So I talk a lot about the great poisoning. We have a tremendous number of industries in the United States that are making money from poisoning people and taking care of poisoned people, and they're very resistant to stopping the poisoning, right? That's what this big debate is about, and it's a budget debate. So
are you talking about like food and healthcare, basically? Talking
about food and healthcare, spraying, what's in the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
If you look at the federal budget, so let's go back to the model, the central banking warfare model. The key to the central banking warfare model is if you're running the reserve currency for the world, the dollar system, you have to make more from running it. You have to make enough from running it to fund your military and intelligence. There's a lot of work in governing the sea lanes and being the global cop and running the trade model and all of that.
Yeah.
So you have expenses. And so when you hear the president yelling at everybody at NATO, like, you have to share more, what he's saying is that the subsidy from the dollar system minus the interest on his debt minus the cost of the military intelligence is no longer working, and he's got to rebalance the model.
The subsidy?
Yeah.
What do you mean by the subsidy?
So running the dollar system, you get to extract a tithe. So let's say tomorrow we created Danny Jones dollars, okay? And whenever you wanted some, you could just print it off your computer.
Okay.
And you could pay people throughout this community for food or for services for doing your landscaping with Danny Jones dollars.
And I have my own printer.
And you have your own printer. That's a big subsidy, right?
Okay. Yes, that is a big subsidy.
That is a big subsidy.
That's an unlimited subsidy.
It's not unlimited if you have to pay everybody in America off to go along with what you want to do. So part of the big cost of the running the model is the American people vote based on domestic issues and don't understand what's involved in running the whole global model.
Right.
And so you've you've basically got to buy them off and pay them off to get them to sort of go along with whatever you want to do.
Got it.
And that's expensive. So if you look what happened at the end of when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. said, we want to be a unipolar model. And one of the reasons I left Washington, I said, your plan won't work. And the failure in the Ukraine was the message. Plan failed. And now we have Rubio, the Secretary of State, saying, oh, we're going to be it's a multipolar world now.
Yeah.
So the unipolar model failed. And so the model has to change. We're still running the reserve currency, but you have to rebalance the model. The unipolar plan didn't work, and it wasted a great deal of capital.
Right.
So now we have to change the model. And so if you see the president talking about, I want Canada to be the 51st state, or I want Greenland. He's trying, if he can't go east-west, remember, they were going to collapse the Soviet Union, get all those resources, and use that to maintain the unipolar model vis-a-vis China. Okay, that didn't work. So now he's talking going north-south instead of going east-west, right?
Right, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So he's just trying to figure out, you have to change the model. And if you look at the debate and discussions going on in Washington, the unfortunate thing is, whoever is in the White House, they have to change the model. They don't have a choice. The technology changes in the world, competition among various parties means we have to change the model. We have to evolve the model. We have to. And so the question is, how do you do it? And unfortunately, there are too many people in America sitting around and saying, wow, we don't want to change. But that's not, it's not changing because whoever's in the Oval Office now wants it to change. It's changing because they got to change. You have to change with the times.
I don't think most people even think about this kind of stuff. I think most people are more focused on squabbles that are irrelevant to geopolitics or the financial system or the balance of power.
That's how you keep them away from the third rail. If I'm running this, I don't want the general population to mess with the third rail. Do you know what I mean by the third rail?
What do you mean by the third rail?
On a transit system or a railroad system, you have two tracks. That's where the wheels go. You have a third track. There's a little trim tab that flips over, and that's where the electricity runs.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that's the power. Okay. And you don't want them messing with the power. So you keep them busy with divide and conquer and the unipolar pendulum and all that kind of stuff. But that has nothing to do with what's really going on.
Right. And when you say that they need the American people to pay for what they're doing, when you mentioned that earlier, were you specifically talking about individuals, or were you talking about like lobbyists?
So here's what I mean. If you look at the federal budget last year, so the 2025 year, we had a military budget of $857 billion.
Yeah.
And Hegseth wants to take it to $1 trillion. He says it needs to be $1 trillion. The HHS budget is $1.8 trillion. And that's because we're all poisoning each other. American people are poisoned. They're chronically ill. And if you look at our healthcare system, it's almost double the cost of Switzerland's healthcare system. So we spend more per capita than just any country in the world by a lot. And so it's very expensive. And so Mark Skidmore, who is the professor at Michigan State University, who's helped me a lot sort of document all the money missing from the federal government, he just finished a calculation. We just did a show with him on the Solari Report. If we cut disability, so the number of people in America who are disabled, back down to 2010 levels, you would drop that HHS budget by $500 billion.
Wow.
Right. So that's what it costs to poison your population. And that's why this battle around the HHS budget and policies is so fractious, including the fact that the government is legally liable, if the truth comes out, for poisoning Americans. Which means if you look at what Toby Rogers says, Toby Rogers is the guy who's really tried to cost out the price of autism. So I got onto all of the HHS issues because I was an investment advisor. And what I discovered was that healthcare fraud was the number one cause of family bankruptcy or loss of family wealth. And number two, in my experience, was financial fraud. So people were just losing their wealth because they were being lied to. They were being lied to by the healthcare system.
By hospitals?
Everybody.
Really? Like legitimate healthcare organizations? Okay.
Yes. And many of those legitimate organizations really didn't know. I mean, my father was a very successful surgeon. You know, I sort of grew up. Unfortunately, we'd say, "Daddy, what did you do today?" And then he'd really tell us.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. No, the dinner table at our
Dark.
house was very. We used to read his surgical books for fun.
What kind of surgeon?
He had, during the World War II, they had taken the University of Pennsylvania Hospital and literally picked up most of the people and the organizational structure and moved it under Stilwell to Burma. So he grew up in, or he did his internship and residency in China, Burma, doing trauma. He was a MASH unit, right? And when he came back, you know, because a lot of the big improvements they make in surgery happens in wartime because they have so much so much opportunity. And when he came back, he worked and redesigned how the emergency room should work all over the country.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and well, it was really funny because both sides of my family, all the competition, there were very competitive people on both sides, but it was like, okay, who did the most to save civilization today? Okay, your grandfather did this and your father did that, and so, for example, his father had gotten the laws changed so they could bring penicillin to Tennessee and had introduced penicillin to Tennessee. And that had been a huge lifesaver for many people. Oh. So at the dinner table, it's like your grandfather brought penicillin to Tennessee. What have you done today?
So this idea that you talk about of the control grid.
Right.
Can you explain what the control grid is?
Sure. So let's say the way George Kennan at the end of World War II said we got 6% of the people and 50% of the resources. Mm-hmm. And to keep that going, we're going to have to be really tough. We're going to have to drop a lot of bombs. So Goldwater came along and he said, we're going to have to drop a lot of bombs and be really tough. And people said, no, we're good Christians. We don't want to. That's not us. Mm-hmm. So Jimmy Carter came along and he shivered in front of the fireplace and said, we're going to have to cut back. And the American people said, no, we don't want to do that. So then the Bushes, I always say the Bushes came along and said, you're all good Christians. Here's your check. Don't ask questions. Okay. So what we've been doing is we've been subsidizing the American people with the blessings of sort of racketeering around the world in the third world and running the warfare. So when you go from a unipolar to a multipolar model, you lose the ability to extract the resources you need to keep that going. So, for example, if I want to trade my Danny dollar for, labor and resources all around the world, and the BRICS nations don't want to take the Danny dollar, then I'm losing the ability to subsidize the American way of life. Okay, so I have to cut back. Mm-hmm. So one way to cut back, so you can say, oh, well, there's a climate change emergency. We want everybody to cut back. You can try that. Or you can, throw on tariffs, and that's going to cause even more inflation. Everybody's going to cut back. But at some point, if you're really going to cut people back, it's very helpful if you have complete control. So if you're the bankers and you want to control fiscal policy and collapse the current Constitution system, if you can exercise complete control with digital technology and an all-digital financial system, you have complete control. So go back to the pandemic. If we say, okay, we want you and your family to lock down, then suddenly your money won't work outside your house. You can order a pizza to be delivered, but you can't leave the house. If you have an electric car, ultimately you can turn off the electric car. And if they say, well, we want you to take the shot, it's mandated. If you don't take it, we'll turn off your money.
Right.
So you're talking about complete control.
And this would be utilized by spending the government money and giving people money, and and in addition to having a centralized, controlled digital.
This would be used by using the private and the public sector financial train tracks. Mm-hmm. To exercise complete central control. So I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a wonderful video that I keep showing of Augustine Carstens, the general manager of the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, in 2020. I was brought up, basically, I was trained to be a central banker.
Okay.
And I had never seen a central banker tell the truth in open public in my life until I saw, when this happened, I almost fell off my chair.
Being sleep deprived makes you perform as poorly as someone who is legally drunk. These deficits include slowed reaction time, reduced working memory, impaired decision-making, and poor emotional regulation. Poor sleep is also an early predictor of death. In fact, people with highly irregular sleep patterns face mortality risks on par with heavy smokers. Most people turn to melatonin, but here's the problem. Melatonin is a hormone and not a vitamin. And most supplements give you doses 10 to 50 times higher than your body would actually produce. And it's actually a prescription drug in many countries. These super physiological doses throw off your body's natural rhythm, affect your body's ability to produce melatonin naturally, and lead to side effects like morning grogginess and hormone disruption. Worst of all, melatonin isn't regulated. Independent lab tests found that actual melatonin contents in melatonin products can vary by up to 464%. The point is you don't know what you're getting, which is why I use Evening Being by Verso. Using a blend of clinically studied patented ingredients shown in multiple human studies to calm an active mind, help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and improve deep and REM sleep without messing with your hormones or leaving you groggy the next day. After taking Evening Being for some time, I've noticed I fall asleep way faster and wake up feeling sharper. It's so effective, one of their customers left a review saying they were able to get off of Ambien, a heavy sleep pharmaceutical drug. So click the link in the description or head on over to ver.so/Danny and use my coupon code DANNY at checkout to save 15% off your first order. Again, go to ver.so/Danny and use the coupon code Danny at checkout to save 15% off your first order. Your body will thank you. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
I was online with John Titus, who does the money market show with me.
Yeah.
And we were chatting as we were watching this IMF panel, and I freaked. I just said, did you see that? He said, don't worry, I got the clip. I said, that's, because in my world, it's impossible. Anyway, but here's what he said, and it's a 59-second video. You can run it if you want. If you go to our website, we have a section called Video Shorts, and in the Financial Transaction Freedom, we have about 100 short videos, and this is the first. He basically said, with digital technology, and he was explaining central bank digital currency, CBDC, but you can do it privately with stable coins. It doesn't have to be a CBDC. It can be a stable coin. And he said, we can make the rules of what you can do with your money,
right,
and we can enforce the rules of what you can do with your money.
Right.
So if they say, Danny, your health isn't what it should, you can't eat pizza. Your money won't work to buy pizza.
Right. Or you can't travel outside the limits of your area code or your zip code. Your credit cards turn off if you go out there, so you can't buy gas, you can't buy food. Right.
But the reality is, with AI and software, I can make a entirely granular control system just for you, one person at a time. Right. And so I can do it for
not a broad brush. It's very specific.
It's 8 billion, and I can collect all the data and apply my social credit system just to you. If you're good, you'll get, maybe you can travel a little bit more. If you're bad, you get locked down.
Maybe you can explain this to me, because I've never had anyone explain this to me before, but there was a story that came out a couple years ago, and I forget the name of the country, but there was a country somewhere in Eastern Europe where the United States basically offered to pay them like a couple $2 billion to mandate vaccinations and all these sort of controls during the pandemic, and they refused to do it, and they refused the money. But basically, the United States was paying another country billions of dollars for these mandates.
Right. Well, they do that all over the country and all over the world.
I don't understand that. I don't understand how that works. Can you explain, why? What is the benefit of us giving billions of dollars to some other random country on the other side of the world for them to lock down their own people?
So there could be many possible reasons, but one is prototyping. So, this is something you're planning on doing in your own country, and you want to see how you could get it to work in another country. And it's a prototype. A lot of times those are prototypes.
Okay.
So,
Steve, so you can find that article.
Yeah, it helped me to know which country it was.
Yeah.
Sounds like it might have been Hungary.
Oh, might have been Hungary. Yeah, you might be right.
Yeah.
So I found I don't have access to it, but it says U.S. ends vaccine funds for poor countries.
No, that's not it. No. It might have been. It was something that came out where the president of that country made like a public statement and called out the United States.
There was one guy who called out the United States, and then he had an assassination attempt. The 5 of the countries that refused to do the mandates in Africa, I have a big article about it. Their leaders either got assassinated or were thrown out in the next election.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, it might have been Hungary. Check on Hungary, but it was one of those countries right around there.
So, my guess is, because I worked for several years with a group of doctors and scientists trying to understand what was happening with the injections. And I absolutely believe that they were trying to install operating systems in people's bodies.
Operating systems.
Yeah. So
this just got dark.
No, if you listen, there's a great clip from right at the beginning of the pandemic when the chief scientist officer at Moderna says we're installing an operating system in people's bodies. And he, he's describing something that can be used plug and play for future vaccines. But if you look at all the material on the Internet of Bodies, you're talking about putting materials in people's bodies that make them basically easier to interact with telecommunications and digital technology.
You're talking about like the 5G stuff and like how 5G can connect to this stuff.
So
these
we
nanobots. There's a whole. I've done a podcast on this before. It's so bizarre and out there and like hard to grasp, but like
it's not hard to grasp at all because
it just seems like sci-fi.
No, it's not sci-fi at all. It's not, just like they're tagging livestock. I mean, one of the things that really helps you to understand what this looks like, I live in a farming community in the United States, and if you know about if you've ever studied livestock management,
no, never.
A lot of this makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
And they are tagging all the livestock, but this is simply a way of, if you get a lot of these nanoparticles into the human body, you're creating the equivalent of an organic barcode. Okay.
But I don't think there was actually any hard evidence that there was any nanoparticles.
So I strongly recommend you. We just published, Patrick Wood at Technocracy News. I was the moderator. We just published the second symposium called Omnivore. And this one is called The Battle for the Brain, and it gets into the Internet of Bodies. And here's what I believe, and I'm not a scientist, so don't ask me to explain this at all. But if you look at all the patents and research and other work done on the Internet of Bodies, it is clear that there are mysterious ingredients in the food. There are mysterious ingredients in the spray. There are mysterious ingredients in the injections. And the question is, what are those for? And I think it's very intentional. I don't think it's an accident. And I think one of the goals is, as the chief scientist officer at Moderna said, is to install an operating system in your body.
That's pretty dark.
Yes, it's very dark. So go to the Purdue Engineering website, to the Internet of Bodies, and look at the whole Internet of Bodies.
I'm sure you're familiar with the story of that guy Charles Lieber, who I think was a Harvard nanobiologist. There's actually a story I just saw on Twitter this morning. He just got hired by China to go work in a university in China. He got busted basically for like taking millions of dollars from China to send.
No, he got busted to keep him quiet, is what I believe.
He got busted to keep him quiet?
Quiet, right.
Explain. What do you mean by that?
So when you have a guy, Charles Lieber is one of the world's leading experts on brain-machine interface. Okay? And he was working with the guys in China, in a very significant way. And he was I think he was the top expert at Harvard on brain-machine interface.
Right.
And they went after him early, they went after him hard, and they put him in a process where he had to be entirely shut up. And then, so they authorized Operation Warp Speed, which, remember, is a military program. And who did they put in charge of it? But they put the former head of research at GSK, who is what? A brain machine interface expert. The guy who ran Operation Warp Speed that Trump appointed was a brain-machine interface expert.
What was his name?
Oh, it's
Head
long.
Head of GS Glaxo.
Head of research.
Head of research.
He had been head of research
At GlaxoSmithKline.
Wow. And his expertise was brain-machine interface. And what's interesting, for many, many years, I've worked with Clifford Carnicom on global spraying. What's in the spray? What does it do to you? And Clifford insists, we just did a huge interview with him at the Solari Report, that the materials, the biosynthetic engineered materials in the spray are exactly what's in the injections. And don't ask me about it because I can't explain it.
Huh. Yeah, that's bizarre.
No, here's the thing. If you are running the planet and you are a risk manager and you're worried about all sorts of risks and you can't tell people what's really going on, the question is, you've got to turn the aircraft carrier before it hits the iceberg. Mm-hmm. And that may be 20 years before it hits the iceberg, and you can't get people to follow you. And so it's very attractive to have complete control and to be able, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that's spent to influence people to adopt this opinion or that opinion, or keep them busy or keep them away from the power line. I mean, the biggest investment almost in this society is persuading people, to believe a fake reality.
And how specifically, where does that money go specifically? Like, not just to news organizations or like TV networks, but like, do you have any or what is your understanding of how money is spent to influence ideas?
So the first thing, you spend a whole world of money on education to get the universities to present a certain kind of, view of the world and to promote certain things. So it starts with education. A huge one, of course, is media. So media is also, in all the different ways you know it, from news to social media, is affirming and encouraging people to go certain ways. And it's not just official ways, like, oh, please go, vote in the next election.
Right.
It's entrainment. It's subliminal program. There's real mind control pumping. And you're pumping that out where they're watching sports. You're pumping that out where they're watching porn. You're pumping that out to get them to think that certain things are real, other things are not real, to head them in certain directions. So you have enormous overt media and enormous covert media, right? That's affirming all those things. Now, your third big expenditure is on intelligence, because you're now tracking everybody. So with AI and software, I can track every person and I can watch what they're thinking and saying and doing, and I can feed back to nudge them if I want them to go in a certain direction. So if I announce lockdowns and I want everybody to really lock down, then I persuade them this is all. I mean, we persuade everybody there was a pandemic when there was no pandemic, right? It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's we're in a world now where everyone has their own reality, unfortunately. It seems like the idea of what is true is slipping away. And there's so many different flavors of reality, whether that be ideological, religious, political, whatever it is. It's everybody has just a different truth. On so many different levels, it's almost impossible to have any consensus of reality anymore. And
I think it's very easy.
Do you?
Yeah, because if you just track the math of time and money, it's concrete. I mean, it doesn't lie.
That's why I love you. I think that's beautiful. That's
well. Do you know how I came to
me.
it? I'm a little girl in West Philadelphia, but because of who my family was and where I went to school. In 1 week, I would go back and forth between all these different worlds and cultures. And I couldn't make sense of anything because everybody was lying. They were lying to themselves. They were lying to each other. I was like, I've been born into a nut house here. Mm-hmm. And so finally I thought, I have to find a way to navigate this. And so what I came up with was the mathematics of time. I love math, and that's my, math is one of my gifts. the mathematics of time and money. And what I discovered is if you could figure out the math of time and money, then you could figure out reality.
The math of time and money can figure out reality.
Where, how many hours, you just count up all the hours. Where are they putting their hours? Okay, count up all the money. Where are they putting their money? How do they spend their money? So I'll give you an example. When I was the assistant in 1984, I overheard two guys on Wall Street, billionaire types, talking about how they were going to roll out entrainment, subliminal programming on TV. And it scared me to death. And that was it for me in TVs. I never had another TV again until the administration. I had a friend helping me decorate. I bought a big house in Washington, and she bought a TV for me without my permission. And she said, you can't work in the Bush administration unless you watch the Sunday shows. So I had it for a little while, and then I gave it away because I hate them. And because I was the FHA commissioner, I'm working with the budget for the home mortgage market. And if you're working with that and at the time there was a big S&L cleanup. So I'm working with all the credit in the financial system in the budget. And because we're going through the 21, we competed for appropriations with 21 other agencies, I basically had to learn the whole budget. So I'm sitting there tracking day to day exactly what's happening in the budget. And then I'm watching, so we're over here whacking up the money in the budget. And you get on the Sunday shows and they're talking about what's going on. And they got this whole fantasy about what's really going on. It's got nothing to do with what's really going on. They're just like, wow, yeah. And so for a year.
The Truman Show.
Exactly. It was the Truman Show. I'm watching. I know exactly what's going on because I'm looking at the money and I'm dealing with the money. And they're going la 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 da 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 da. And it's entertainment. It's got nothing to do with what's going on.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So, but if you follow, that's why,
What year was this?
That was 89 and 90.
89 and 90.
Yeah. 89 and 90. And that's why, so under the law, so there at the time there were 4 mortgage insurance funds, but there are 2 of them are most of the money. So under the law, and the big one, the single family fund, by law, the first thing I did when I got to Washington is I read all the law related to what my responsibilities. I want to know under the law, what am I responsible to do? So I read the law, and it said that I had sole fiduciary responsibility for what was then the $320 billion mortgage insurance fund. And I was required by law to run it on a self-sufficient basis. So the premiums we charged for the credit had to cover the defaults and expenses. So I'm required to run it. So I decide, okay, I'm going to try and get how much money are we making or losing? So I called in the budget officer. They bring in the budget, and it would have gone 2/3 of the way to the ceiling with all the budget justifications. So I'm a speed reader. I read through it several times that weekend. I called the budget officer in on Monday. I said, nowhere in this budget does it say whether I'm making or losing money. He said, that's not in the budget. I said, if I have sole fiduciary responsibility to run this on a self-supporting basis, I need to know that.
Right.
He said, well, the accountants have that information. I said, well, give me their number. I'm going to call them. He said, they report to a different assistant secretary. You're not allowed to talk to them. And I said, well, that's going to change. So, no, I had raised a lot of money for George H.W. Bush, and all I got was a pair of cufflinks, and the accountants moved over to report to me. So I did. I used all my pull, and I got the accountants moved over to report to me. They come in the first day. We are losing $11 million a day in the single-family fund. So I said, look, all real estate's local. We got 10, at the time there were 10 federal regions, they're less now. I said, we have 10 federal regions, 80 field offices. Where are we making and losing money? He said, we don't have place-based financials. I said, we mail out checks. We have zip codes. I said, this is a rush. It's an emergency. Get the numbers. Yeah. Well, it turned out we were making profit in 8 regions and losing everything plus more in 2 regions, which was, it was a black budget fraud. It was the Bushes and the Clintons. It was the Texas region, which included Arkansas, and the Colorado region. It was just like...
it was a black hole of money just vanishing.
Yeah, it was the mortgage fraud. So you remember, we had a big, the S&L crisis in 89, and that cleanup was a tremendous amount of mortgage fraud. Anyway, so I could talk about all those guys in mortgage fraud all day long. But.
And then the day before 9/11, Rumsfeld says that we have, what was it, like $4 trillion that were just unaccounted for?
They were missing, DOD was missing $4 trillion, but he said 2.3.
He said it was 2.3.
But it was 4. And I was working with a reporter, and we had a huge story coming out that Friday about the whole missing money and what it meant per person. So we had calculated for each taxpayer in each state how much you were missing. So, yeah. So that was the financial coup, which had started in 1998.
And where did all that money go?
Well, that's what I've been trying to figure out. And without the bank statements, I can't, so I've tried to map out, because money, remember, you're too young to remember did you ever see the old Pillsbury Doughboy commercials
Of
where
course.
they squeeze down on one and it pops out someplace else?
Oh, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, so you're probably too young. So when the money started to going missing from the Treasury and the federal government, the offshore havens started to just balloon, So this is going down and this is going up. And anyway, but I have tried to unpack where the money's gone and what they've been spending it on. And I have a lot of guesses. But
What's your best guess?
I think it's many different things. The first thing, I think you've been financing a new system. So I call it the Breakaway civilization. But I think you've literally been financing a new system. And it's like when you're running a company and you keep the old systems going and you get the new systems up and you bring the resources over steadily. And then at some point you're ready to bring this down. And I used to say the pandemic was the breakaways breaking back in and taking over. But I think they've moved a lot of money out. And in theory, if you look at how much has been stolen, it's enough to run a global government on an endowment basis. It is.
How much roughly total has been stolen?
So as of 2015, there was 21 trillion in undocumentable adjustments, but that's not cash. And it could reflect money coming in. So you could be bringing money in from the war zone. So how much is net missing? It's impossible to tell. But given everything, I would be amazed if it wasn't at least that much missing. So now, what I think you've been doing is you've been making enormous investments in black budget technology and infrastructure. So, so I think you've got a huge physical infrastructure. Some of it, when you did 9/11, you were able to move a lot more black budget on budget. And so that sort of eased the pain, because the problem with the black budget as of 9/11 was to get that money, you had to tell. The fraud had gotten so dysfunctional and wasteful. So you wanted to do more on budget. But, whether it's building a new governance system and a new endowment to run it, or invisible weaponry, secret space program, the infrastructure underground to platform that, I think it's all those things.
One of the theories that has been bouncing around in my head from recent guests that I've had on is that military contractors have been taking money from the U.S. government and from the Pentagon to develop futuristic weaponry, develop new physics, alternative propulsion.
Absolutely.
Crafts that have some sort of alternative propulsion systems since the 70s, or even actually probably since the 50s, I think.
Here's how it works. Okay. 47. Do you understand the legal structure of how they did it?
No.
Okay. 47, you passed the National Security Act. Okay. And that gives you the ability to set up the secret infrastructure. 49, you passed the CIA Act. They literally had to kill the Secretary of Defense to do that. They assassinated Forrestal to get that done. We have a lot of interesting material on the Forrestal assassination on the Solari. And you should go through. Yeah, you should learn about Forrestal and what caused that assassination and what it did to create. You literally took several sections.
Wasn't he the KKK guy? Okay.
Not that I know of. He was the president of Dillon Reed. He was a partner of Dillon Reed.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought he was in the KKK for some reason. I might be thinking of someone else. Never mind.
I don't know. I've never read that about Forrestal. I really studied him, but I don't know.
Okay.
So
don't worry about it, Steve.
Well, even if he was, that's not what got him killed. What got him killed was standing in the way of creating Israel and giving them the nuclear bomb.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he wanted disclosure on the black budget. He was for disclosure on the black budget, and he didn't want Israel. He didn't want that part of the organized crime syndicate to get sovereign powers. So. Anyway, what happened was they made a deal on the 49. They got rid of Forrestal. They made a deal on the 49 Act. That created the CIA.
Okay.
And that made the CIA the most powerful banker in the world. Eisenhower put him in charge of Area 51 security. And literally, once you look at how the Exchange Stabilization Fund and sort of the different money aspects of the 47 and 49 Act organized to work, you've now created this financial mechanism that combines covert violence and makes it the most powerful banker in the world. I should say, on the covert side, the most powerful bank in the world is BIS.
Didn't they use, I could be wrong about this, but didn't Dulles take a bunch of money from the budget to rebuild Europe after World War II to build Area 51? That's what
I don't know if he used that to build Area 51. He ran a slush fund out of the Exchange Stabilization Fund from Sullivan Cromwell and before they got the 49 Act created. And part of that was to create this infrastructure, because part of it said you can appropriate to all the different agencies and then claw it out secretly to give it to the intelligence agencies. Right. So they created, after World War II and all the slush fund money they got from World War II, they created a mechanism to constantly replenish the covert money. But here's the big thing. When Bush came in during the Reagan years as vice president, his deal with the intelligence agencies was he gets to run, or with Reagan, was he gets to run the National Security Council and the intelligence agencies. He creates an executive order signed by the president, by Reagan, that corporations can do highly classified work. Now, let me tell you what that means. What that means is the Treasury can issue an infinite number of bonds and use that money to pay corporations to do highly secret things, including just gifting them all of the black technology funded by the taxpayers and moving it onto their balance sheet, and do it in a secret way that generates enormous profits in the stock market.
Wow.
Okay? So now you've got a way. Now, what's the number one source of campaign contributions?
Companies like this.
Capital gains.
Capital gains. Okay.
Capital gains. I have a stock. It's trading at a multiple of 20. I give you $1 million a year contract. That goes up by $20 million. Your stock goes up. That creates capital gains for the investors and the executives, who then turn around and they or their law firms make political contributions. It's a kickback system.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand.
So if you read my book, I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, and it was designed to explain to you how that kickback system works.
Right.
Because, and the quote we have at the beginning is an old New Jersey street saying, make a law, make a business. So every time the government does something that makes stocks go up, they get a kickback of campaign contributions from that.
Right.
And of course, the taxpayers funding the whole thing. Now, let's go back to corporations. Now I can transfer trillions of dollars of invaluable black technology into the corporations and fund them with taxpayers' money to own and develop it secretly and keep it away from FOIA. So you and I can put in a FOIA and we can't find out because it's behind the corporate veil.
Right. Now, one of the fears about this is that allegedly since the 50s when they started working on some of this stuff, is that it's gotten so advanced in these black corporate, or these black military industrial complex, aerospace corporations, whatever you want to call them, that they've become essentially more powerful than the U.S. military.
Correct.
Because of the technology that they have own.
Now, I can't say that it's more powerful than the U.S. military because they need the U.S. military to do a lot of what they're doing.
Well, essentially the way it was described to me is that these corporations or these organizations basically are so powerful and have such advanced technology that they have their own Air Force, their own their own Navy, everything.
Right. And we've had senators stand up and say this, but what I call them is a breakaway civilization.
Right.
They have broken away and they are so much more advanced Now, if you look at their assets, what I would say, if I could assert jurisdiction, those are our assets. Those were either gifted or stolen. They belong to us.
Right.
But it's not corporations who have a lot of technology. It is a breakaway civilization, and they literally think of themselves as a separate civilization and not subject to our laws.
Separate from not only the United States, but separate from the world, from all nations.
Separate from the human race.
Separate from the human race.
Right. In other words, so I'll give you an example, and I've told this story many times before. When I was at HUD.
True Classic isn't just a shirt. It's designed to feel good and make you look even better. They cut their shirts to fit my physique and not just the general human form. But they don't stop there. It turns out they apply this to all their designs, from hoodies to jeans and activewear. Everything you need to level up your style. A great fit is in their DNA. Why make a potato sack when you can sculpt the body with clothes? It's why I have so much trust in them. Their clothes are designed to complement important areas, giving you just enough breathing room around the body, instead of draping or sliding around. True Classic keeps you looking and feeling good from the gym to work to date nights. I've been wearing my True Classics for a while now, and I'm still impressed when I put them on every morning. Sometimes I cry when I'm getting dressed because it feels so beautiful. Skip the overpriced designer nonsense and skip the cookie cutter potato sacks. True Classic delivers premium essentials built for real life. Whether you're out in the town or working up a sweat, level up your style with clothes that fit any scenario. You can grab yours at Target or Costco, but for the best deals, head to trueclassic.com/Danny. That's TRUECLASSIC.com/DANNY to get hooked up today. It's linked down below. Now back to the show.
I was in a meeting with the secretary, and we had called in the regional administrator, so we had 10 regional administrators, and he was very angry at the regional administrator from California because he had implemented a court decision. A court had decided something, he had implemented it, and the secretary was very angry at him, and he said to him in front of everybody, "Mr. Secretary, I had to, that's the law." And the secretary just explodes with fury. He says, the law, I don't have to obey the law. I report to a higher moral authority. And that's a perfect example. When you're in Washington, you have a group of people whose attitude is, look, as long as I'm doing what the bankers tell me to do, I don't have to obey the law. The law's irrelevant to me. You know, I'm part of the breakaway law. You know, I have to obey them. I don't have to obey this law.
Now, as far as this quote unquote breakaway civilization, we have these private military, industrial complex, aerospace, weapons development agent companies, and we also have these banks. How connected are they? And like, what I know you've talked about, like space research and even developing underground facilities, these deep underground, is it the same thing? These DUMBs, these deep underground military bases.
Right.
They're investing in all this stuff simultaneously.
That's what it appears to me to be.
Okay.
So, and remember, a lot of the underground bases are publicly announced or known as existing. So, you know, and there's a lot of things you would do or store underground, just any good risk manager would do it. So it's a continuity of government thing to have those kind of facilities.
Right.
So, you know, but I think my guess is the infrastructure is a lot greater than has been publicly made aware of.
Like they have full cities under there that would be livable.
That's what you know, I don't know if you've ever watched the different videos of the truckers, but if you spend a lot of time talking to the truckers, because the truckers have to deliver a lot of material into those bases, and you'll get a lot of reports about what they've seen or heard. So that's my guess.
Have you seen the videos of those salt mines? There's like giant salt mines over somewhere in
Poland? Are you thinking?
Maybe Poland, yeah. And they're just enormous. They're just these caverns with, like, I would say they're 100 feet tall on the inside. And it looks like New York City underneath a mountain.
Really?
They're insane. And I would imagine it could be easily converted into some sort of underground city, but they're salt mines apparently. And there's just like lines of semi-trucks driving through them.
So I live half the year in the Netherlands. And the power of Northern Europe grew up on the fish.
Look at that right there.
Oh, wow.
It's bizarre.
I bet that's Poland. I don't know.
So, yeah, where's it at, Steve?
It's huge salt mine planetarium. I don't know.
Click the link. Boop, 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 boop. About.
Dracula grave? Really?
You can find
so
it, Steve.
Northern
We believe
Europe
in you.
grew up on the cod and fishing. You know, a huge amount of the wealth in Northern Europe came from the ocean, from the fish.
Right.
But so I live in Friesland, and one of the things that made the Frieslands were amazing world travelers, and they figured out how to get the salt from the Polish mines and salt the cod. So you could put cod in a barrel, salted, and you would have animal protein that was good for 10 years. So you
Right.
could sail anywhere in the world.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, it's in Romania.
Romania.
I had to zoom all the way out.
Okay, well that would be consistent with Dracula's grave.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's insane photos and videos of this place that are just mind blowing and kind
Isn't
of
that
terrifying
beautiful?
too.
It reminds me of Total Recall.
Yeah, look at that. That's wild.
So I will tell you that in my opinion, you have a corporate infrastructure which is literally out of control. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, I used to have these fights with the defense contractors because I was required to get the accounts when I still needed data, and the systems were run by the big defense contractors at HUD, and they would refuse to give me the data. So I'd have these wars with them. It's like, who really runs HUD? Is it the defense contractor, or is it the person who's
Right.
legally responsible?
Right.
You would have
And
these
then-
huge fights.
And then one of the biggest problems is like you were alluding to earlier is they control the government by lobbying, right? Like they
can control the government by killing people who don't do what they say. That's how they control the government.
Right. And lobbying.
Lobbying, I mean, they're different layers, but, I'll give you an example. So I litigated with the federal government for 11 years and then fought with the IRS. And anyways, 11-year shaggy dog process. And when it was over, I didn't want to go back into the investment world without explaining what had happened. So I wrote an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. I've tried to publish it 3 times. The last time, each time I ran into just enormous headwinds and problems and threats. But the last time they threatened to kill somebody in my family. So I just,
What?
yeah.
Who?
I can guess where it's coming from. I know how it was delivered. And I know who delivered the messages, but who started it, I can guess, but I don't know. But I took them seriously. I thought, okay,
It was delivered through somebody like in person, through somebody you know?
Yeah. 2 were acquaintances, 1 was somebody I know, but it's very carefully crafted so that the people who deliver the message don't necessarily understand what they're a part of, but
Right.
And I thought there was a reasonably good chance that they would do it. So I did. You never know.
And you just published this book on your website?
It was already on.
Oh, it was already online.
It was already online, so I just left it online. It's not censored. It's there.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so so first of all, what is the Bank of International Settlements and how are they tied to this breakaway civilization?
So the Bank of International Settlements is a central bank of central bank. So the 63 largest, most important central banks in the world belong to the BIS. The top central bankers meet there regularly. They have a group called the Financial Stability Board that defines systemically important institutions, which to me appear to essentially get some of the benefits of their sovereign immunity. And they have the power to move money and hold it on their balance sheets secretly. So if there's 21 trillion missing from the U.S. government, in theory, you could move that 21 trillion to the BIS and have it sit on the BIS all day long and use the BIS to move it to lots of countries who then donate to the Gates and Clinton Foundation, for example.
Oh, wow.
I'm using that as a theoretical example.
Sure.
See what I mean? Mm-hmm. But because they have sovereign immunity, we've created since World War II a whole network of organizations around the world who have sovereign immunity. They're above the law. So we have, We have parts of the UN, we have the World Bank, we have the IMF. They have all sorts of different variations of sovereign immunity. We have a whole bunch in Latin America. And we've created this meta-structure using international treaties or using the sovereign immunity entities for all sorts of behavior and economic activities that are not subject to our national laws.
Essentially for running the world. Because if you want to run the world, you can't obey the laws. If you're the, I think you've used this analogy before, if the world is your house,
right,
and you're the owner of the house, there's certain things that you have to do that.
Right. And it allows you to move a lot of money and a lot of data and information secretly.
When we talk about these banks and the people that are running these banks, like, do we know who the individuals are?
So in my experience, the system is run through committees, consensus. So I'll give you an example. When I was on Wall Street, a lot of the money in the United States is run around the federal budget, okay, because it's such a big portion. Mm-hmm. In any county in America, 40 to 50% of the income comes from the federal budget, mm-hmm. okay? So it really drives the economy. Okay, so the appropriations vote out, sort of their plan for the next year. And so their recommended appropriations come out from the committees. And then the big questions, the big things to be debated or figured out or questions are rolled up and sent out to the Bohemian Grove. Everybody comes out to the Grove, they meet, and they chew over the big things, and then they make their decisions. And then that goes back to Washington. Everybody's on vacation, and then the staff gets everything ready to vote for the budget in September, and then the new budget goes forward in October. And if that process breaks down and you have a real food fight, then you've got a real mess. But the big decisions are made by consensus, and you use, whether it's a Bilderberg meeting or
Council of Foreign Relations.
They're a little bit different, but
okay.
Yeah, our executive committee of the Council on Foreign Relations. You have these meetings where you get people from all different industries, all different occupations together so they can coordinate and collaborate. And they make these decisions very much by committee or consensus process, which is why once they agree to something, everybody hates to, you can't bucket because, we've told 20 different industries we're going to go to the right. And so you can't just go to the left. You hiccup everybody.
What can you explain to me exactly what the Bilderberg Summit is all about?
So I'm not that familiar with the Bilderbergers. I mean, I never, if you look at who I worked with,
yeah.
I mean, I worked with some people on Wall Street or in Washington who were in the Bilderbergers, but it was simply a more international version. And my guess is if you look at, we grabbed so much booty at the end of World War II. I think that one of the initial goals of the Bilderbergers was to manage that, that sort of pot of money.
I heard that Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt were the representatives in the United States for the Bilderberg Summit.
So more recently, that's possible because the tech is so important to build the control. Mm-hmm. So, I hate to say it, the 21 trillion is, we sort of sucked out as much money as possible and put the government on a debt trap. But if you look at what they're doing now they're stealing all the data. And it looks to me like they're building up to steal the rest of the assets.
What's left?
There's, if you have an AI and you want to build a control grid and a social credit system, the most valuable data you need is payment data. And so taking the Social Security, the IRS, and the Treasury payment data, it's the most valuable data or some of the most valuable data in the world.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that's worth, it's funny, Naomi Wolf and I were trying to cover this at one point, and she said, that data's worth more than $1 trillion, and it is. And it's interesting because Musk was out raising capital for XAI and had a deal with Palantir AI at the same time. And my guess, I think...
Palantir has an AI?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Well, according to published reports, XAI and Palantir had made a partnership, and when Musk was sucking all this data out. And my guess is that data is, they sucked it into the AI on the just do it method.
What do you make of everything Elon is doing and Doge and buying X and?
Well, let me come around to that,
okay.
and I'll The other thing is, and this is from a video, an interview Howard Lutnick said. He said, "Don't worry about so he's the Secretary of Commerce, but he was a primary dealer, and he was the guy who lived next to Epstein for many years. Okay, he lived next door. Okay,
Right.
so Lutnick says, don't worry about the $36 trillion of debt because we have on the U.S. balance sheet we have 500 trillion of land and mineral resources, which is true. The federal government owns a huge amount of the land in the United States.
Oh, wow.
Right. And during Trump, in fact, he ordered up a geological survey that would allow basically to map 100% of the mineral resources in the country. So if you want to plunder the U.S. balance sheet, it's worth a fortune. It could create, new kind of Rothschild and Rockefeller fortunes if you plundered it.
This is crazy stuff.
No, it's not. It's just money.
It's just money.
No, but here's the thing. We have one problem in the United States. We have a secret governance system. And that secret governance system has decided to change how we're governed and managed. And we're having a big disagreement because they want central control, and digital technology will allow them to do that for the first time in history. And we don't want that. We want to be free. So we're having a big debate about whether or not we're going to go to a complete control grid or we're going to be free. That's the debate. And whether the breakaways can break back in and say, okay, we're dictating to you. Now that we've stolen all your money, we're going to dictate to you how you're going to live.
So who is it that specifically that wants this control grid? Is this just some evil group that is decentralized from the U.S. government, somehow has control over them? Or is this sort of just like a diaspora of good and evil that is littered throughout the entire U.S. government?
So think of this as a dynamic discussion back and forth between the population and the people who are responsible to manage the planet. And, if you come up through the layers of the financial system, both the bankers, the insurance, the whole thing, and then the people who make the top governance decisions, and I can only guess who they are, but I have some guesses. They are responsible for the intergenerational pools of capital, and they were responsible for risk. And they, over the last 50 years, in my experience, they have been exceptionally frustrated. They find managing the general population very frustrating and scary. Because remember, occasionally you have revolutions and people get guillotined, right?
Yeah.
So they're afraid. My personal experience is they're very afraid of the general population because they are few and we are many.
Right.
Right. And they're risk managers and they think in very long. And what's happened is, particularly in the United States, you have a huge cycle of disrespect now between the general population and the people responsible to lead the financial system. And the more the criminals get away with really bad stuff, the more they hate the general population. And it's become a very ugly cycle of disrespect, in a way that didn't exist when I was a kid. So, and that is dangerous because, well, look at the Great Poisoning. I mean, we have the U.S. government systematically poisoning and killing the population. The COVID pandemic was a mass atrocity. You've killed millions, or you've killed or disabled millions of Americans intentionally.
And why do you think specifically they did? Does this have anything to do with depopulation?
It has to do. So the budget deal in 1995 broke, and that was it was described to me by the top pension fund. The president of the largest pension fund in the country described it to me in 1997. He said, they've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall. So a concerted effort was made to put the government and the retirement system on a sound financial basis. It didn't work. They decided, okay, we're just going to start pulling money out. That's when the financial coup started. And that is when decisions started to be made that systematically lowered life expectancy. And from 2000 to 2017, well, ever since then, I've been on every radio show or internet show that will have me talking about the 21 trillion missing. And that's because it's a formula. You have retirement funds. If you won't fund them, and the political wheel made it very clear in 1995, we refuse to fund them. You only have another way to balance the budget, and that's to lower life expectancy. And
So we don't have to pay them.
Well, if you look at the charts, literally from when that budget deal busted, life expectancy started to fall. So here are the other 19 industrial countries, and here's the U.S., and it starts to go down, 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 and then the pandemic, it drops off the cliff. And the divergence between...
During the pandemic, the people that were most affected were elderly or people that were, already on death's door with multiple comorbidities.
It's a little bit more complex than that, but yes. And the latest reports from Social Security is it's working. Social Security has improved. But here's the thing. I'm going to be a tough guy. This is a formula. So you either put the money in...
Tapering the Ponzi scheme. I've heard.
It's not a Ponzi scheme, but if you're not going to fully fund it, then you can lengthen retirement age or you can lower life expectancy. It's a formula.
Right.
And if the body politic refuses to do the financially responsible thing, then you got two choices, and you can't get there by delaying the retirement age. That won't work politically. So you just poison the pop. You just put them on a slow kill. And that's what's happened. And you can say, oh, the bankers are bad guys. But if you saw the confirmation hearings for Kennedy's appointment, I mean, what you saw were scores of senators refusing to take responsibility for a chronic epidemic among our children, which is an extinction level event. That was not the bankers sitting in the city of London. That was senators sitting in Washington refusing to take responsibility. It's one thing to say to Kennedy, we don't like your plan to end the chronic epidemic, of illness among our children. Here's a better plan. But they wouldn't own it. They just want to say, no. It was, that is a society that will fail. I mean, that's that. If you've ever,
this is because a lot of those congressmen and senators were paid for by pharmaceutical companies, right?
There are many plausible explanations, none of them good.
Right.
So they could have control files. They could be bribed. They could be mind controlled. They could be not care. They could, there are many possible reasons, none of which are good. But what they're not is they're not competent to be a U.S. senator.
Right. Totally.
Right. They don't.
Wow.
And if I'm the bankers and I want to control fiscal policy, I've proven on national TV that the people who run fiscal policy are not competent to run it. Because the HHS budget is bankrupting the country. And it's not just bankrupting the country. I mean, I was an investment advisor for 10 years, and the way I learned all about this is watching the healthcare system bankrupt families. So that's my, what I'm angry about is there is no reason why our economy can't be highly prosperous and successful. But it can only be successful if the people are successful, if our children are successful, if our families are successful. That's what it takes to have a successful civilization.
But how do you push back this sort of, for lack of a better term, crony capitalism that seems to be intrinsically tied to the U.S. government, and it seems like all that matters is that, and the people are like the middle class is being gutted. There's more billionaires being.
So here's what you do. The first thing you do is you bring transparency. So that's your business, right? You're trying to bring transparency to what's going on, right? Second thing is you describe the solutions. And the real solution is when millions of us proceed to behave, because right now, the people who are implementing all the evil doing, all the poisoning, all the control grid, the people who are implementing, you know who they are? Us. We're implementing this. I could walk into a room of health freedom activists, get all their retirement funds, pull together all the stocks and show them they're financing it. They're putting, they're supporting, we are going to work and implementing this. We are putting our money into this, and we have the power to change that overnight. If 10% of the people in the country called up their broker and said, I am not financing any of this evil doing, pull my money out of all these bad guys, I'm not going to buy them, I'm not going to support them, I'm not going to date them.
Pull our money out of the banks.
No, pull your money, shift your money to the banks that are good. You've got a tremendous number of great banks and honest bankers in this country who would love to diminish this.
What are the good banks?
So if you go to Solari, we have an article called How to Find a Good Local Bank, and we have a 4-part series on how to identify and find a great bank or credit union.
Okay.
But I
take it JP Morgan's not one of the good ones.
So we have a very interesting document. If you do a search on Solari for JP Morgan Chase.
Oh, really?
We had a subscriber after the financial crisis, and in my personal experience, JP Morgan was deep in the mortgage fraud at FHA and the government. Mm-hmm. So she continued to bank at JP Morgan Chase. And I don't know if you know how the Madoff fraud worked.
Yes, I'm familiar.
Okay, so Madoff after the mid 90s he had 2 businesses. He had a brokerage business and he had the money management, the Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. And the Ponzi scheme only had one bank account at JP Morgan Chase. So I was interviewing Helen Chapman, who's one of the attorneys who litigated the Madoff. She'd been a Madoff victim but represented other Madoff victims. And I said to her, Helen, who was the securities custodian? If JP Morgan Chase was the bank account, who was the securities custodian? And she said, there was none because he never bought any securities. And I said, but Helen, that means JP Morgan Chase controlled the whole time. In other words, under the laws, they knew that Madoff was not buying any securities because there was no securities custodian and the money. In fact, they would run with huge balances at JP Morgan Chase, according to her interview.
Wow.
Right. They were they were the senior partner.
That's insane.
They were the senior partner. So it's an amazing interview. Anyway, so I had this person put together a list of every criminal and civil money penalty that JP Morgan Chase had paid from 2006 to, I think it's 2018. It's up at Solari. And then we had our editors go through it very, very carefully. And we found $42 billion of civil and criminal money penalties for financial, activities that I would describe as, they clearly knew they were defrauding people and harming people. And, so my question is, why is anybody, if an institution would do that, now, I can make arguments where it makes sense for somebody to have their money at JP Morgan Chase for things we don't need to go into. There's all sorts of esoteric reasons. But I would say that a majority of people who are free to move their money out of JP Morgan Chase, why don't they? Why wouldn't you act in your own?
So convenient. The app, have you ever used the app? It's great. They got Zelle. You can send money with Zelle to anyone super easily.
So having been...
I don't think people have time to think about this stuff, like normal, everyday working people.
So you're saying that you would do business with the Russian mob because it's convenient?
I mean, if I knew I was doing business with the Russian mob, no, I wouldn't do that.
Right. So what I'm telling you is, if you will do business with people who steal and defraud, then it's...
I would choose not to if I knew about it.
Crime that pays is crime that stays. Okay. So, I mean, if you look at the financial crisis, we shoveled $27 trillion of taxpayers' money into institutions, so that was a huge theft. That was a huge taking. Why would you ever bank with any of those institutions if you could avoid it?
Right.
And there are times some people can't avoid it, so I'm not. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'll never forget being in Washington and there's some big protest, and one of the guys said to me is, look, as long as they have Citibank credit cards in the back of their pocket, I don't care if they walk up and down. Why? Because that's
traceable, right? They're tracking.
Well, as long as you're giving me all your data and you're giving me all your money, and I control your money and your data.
Control the money and the data, yeah.
What do I care if you walk up and down?
But so Trump has been super, this current administration, this new administration, or at least when Trump was running, he was very pro Bitcoin.
Trump was put in by the bankers to get the control grid. The other team in the Uniparty wasn't moving fast enough. They couldn't get the control grid.
I knew it.
I sent you a link. We just did a new collection of all the things Trump is doing to move the control grid. He is moving very, very fast. When it comes to building, first he's getting the Real ID implemented very aggressively. Real ID, to do a control grid, you need a very high quality precision national ID that's interoperable with all the other IDs around the world. And he's got Kristi Noem out there pushing the Real ID like there's no tomorrow. So they're working, and it's done through the states, but the feds are pushing it. So the first thing you need is a digital ID. The second thing you need is an all-digital financial system. So you got to kill cash, and you got to make everybody interact digitally. And if you look at what he's doing with taxes and Social Security, he's trying to make everybody, he's canceled pennies, but he's also canceled now. Normally I pay my taxes with paper, and now he's saying, no, you got to do everything digital. It's not this year, but the next year.
Really?
So he's trying to, if you go through that list, I've got 50 different items of what he's doing. And if you look at what they're doing with the Genius Act and stablecoin, he said no CBDCs, but stablecoin. So I don't know if you've read the Genius Act, which is the new plan for stablecoins. Okay. A CBDC would be issued by the Federal Reserve, so presumably the New York Fed and the Fed member banks, okay? Now, they are owned by their members. So Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, they own, as members, they own the New York Fed and, basically govern it, okay? And the New York Fed is the depository for the Treasury, and the different banks work as agent to do those transactions, okay? So now under the Genius Act, what they're saying is the guys who own the New York Fed are all going to create subsidiaries and issue stablecoin, which will be interoperable and can work with a social credit system. Now, here's the beauty of it. The New York Fed, under the law, has direct obligations to Congress, and Congress has jurisdiction over them. If you do it through the owners of the Fed, through their private subsidiaries, you're going to have some degree of freedom. So it gives you more freedom.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So if you think this is improvement, you have another thing coming. Anyway, but what they're planning to do on stablecoin, which I have to say as a financial matter is quite clever. Remember the pallets of cash you sent to Iraq?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is going to be the digital equivalent of the pallets of cash sent to Iraq, because what they want to do with stablecoins. So a stablecoin is just a bank deposit or a treasury bill or bond. So it's fully collateralized by $1. Mm-hmm. You put $1 in, and these stable coins are going to, you have some stable coins that do gold or other things, but these are going to be $1. Mm-hmm. And this is going to create a huge market for the treasury bills and bonds. And the bank subsidiaries will create the stable coins. So it'll be fully collateralized in treasury bonds or bills. Mm-hmm. But then you can send them out on Google Payment and Apple Payment and all the wallets around the world. And literally you can get people from Bolivia to South Korea coming into your state and using stable coins. So you're literally going to tender for the global population, try and get everybody off of their local currency into stable coins, and you're going to pump out massive amounts of private credit to make it really attractive. So you're just going to hand out money and get everybody on the dollar.
And you don't think the BRICS would try to compete with this?
Of course.
They would, right?
Yeah, of course.
And do you think this is something that could legitimately be implemented? And if so, how soon do you think they would start doing this?
I think as soon as you pass the Genius Act, it can go very, very fast.
And where are we at right now with the Genius Act and it getting passed?
I'm assuming it's going to pass sometime soon. If it doesn't pass before the session breaks, it'll pass in the fall, is my guess. So it could, you could really see the world rock. Now, our problem in America...
Is Trump aware of all this stuff? Or what do you think? What is his motive in all of this? Or not his motive, but is he basically a useful idiot here?
So I don't know Trump. Yeah. I lived in New York for 11 years, and the PR firm we use was did his business too. Everything I know about Trump, I know from Howard Rubenstein and
Oh,
company.
wow.
Anyway, but I think Trump is in a box, and all I see, I have to judge people by what they're doing, and what it looks to me like Trump and Musk are implementing the control grid at high speed. And don't believe me, go look at that list, because what you have to say is, okay, to do a control grid, we need a digital ID implemented that's very high quality, high precise. Check the box. We need an all digital financial system. Check the box. We need a way of doing interoperable money. Check the box. If you look at what Doge is doing, we need a social credit system. Check the box.
Wait, what do you mean by that? What Doge is doing?
Doge is, from what it looks like to me, and I'm basing my assessment of what I know from Doge includes, I read the Financial Times, I need to read the Wall Street Journal, and I need to read Wired. Wired has done a very thorough job of trying to document what's happening in the systems. And I think basically what they've done is they've taken, so if I wanted to stop fraud in the U.S. government, I would say there's 20 trillion missing from DOD, there's $1 trillion missing from HUD. I'm going to go in, figure out where it went, and get it back.
Right.
That's not what they did. If you said to me, I want to build a social credit system that can be used to enforce control against the American people and basically lock them down with both enforcement and social credit, I would go get the Social Security data, the IRS data, and the Treasury payment data. And that's exactly what they did. And I would privatize it. I would just take it and put it in private AI with XAI and Palantir AI. And if Palantir still has the contracts with Treasury and the IRS to enforce, you got everybody. And you add the Kennedy's aggregating the healthcare data, you put it with the healthcare data. Now they've been aggregating this kind of data. I used to call it the data beast. So they've been aggregating this kind of powerful data since the 90s. So I don't think this is all new. So for example,
IRS data, healthcare data, and combining it all together into one system combined with AI.
Right. But I think this time the federal government has generally done a pretty good job of siloing the data to protect privacy laws for many applications. But I think this unsilos everything and moves it private and puts it on an out-of-control basis is my guess as to what's probably happened. Now, this is conjecture, remember, but if I wanted to build a control grid, that's exactly what I would do.
Wow. Let's take a quick break.
Okay.
I got to use the restroom. We'll be right back. I'm curious about Joseph Farrell and what you know about him, your connection to him.
So I've worked with him for years. We're very close.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did you guys meet? Are you back up, Steve?
Yeah, we're back.
Okay. Cool.
So I met Joseph by reading his books. I started reading his books and I just concluded he was a great scholar. It never occurred to me that I could get to know him. And then I met him and we started to work together. And every quarter we do a 5 to 10 hour recording called News, Trends, and Stories. It's basically going through what happened over the last quarter of the last year. We do 4 a year. And we look at everything that's going on a very integrated basis. So we go through we'll define the top 10 to 15 stories, and then we go through something called unanswered questions. And we're both great believers in framing questions. If you don't have the intelligence you need to know for sure what's going on, you can still define questions and use those questions to learn more and more and more and get to the point where you know more. So, and we have a section called unanswered questions and then one called inspiration. And we spend we just finished a 10-hour recording.
Really?
The number one story was 3 hours. It was the Trump the first 70 days.
So my understanding, for people who don't know who he is, my shallow understanding of Joseph, his background is he's published 10 books on how there is this breakaway civilization of Nazi origin.
So Joseph, the thing you have to understand about Joseph is a great scholar. He is a scholar. He has his PhD from Oxford. He studied patristics and ancient Christian theology. And he intended to have a very serious academic career. And he proceeded into academia after having his doctorate. He grew up in South Dakota and walked smack into the fact that the American academic institutions were all not interested in serious scholarship and were headed the wrong way. And he literally ended up at one point working in a casino as a dealer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, trying to support himself. So then he just started writing books about, sort of what's going on. And he focused on, so again, we've been talking about the breakaway civilization. Who's really wanting things and why are they doing what? And he'll go way back in history. He'll go back 1,000, 2,000 years. The Venetians, how have the Venetians and the Venetian model rolled into the central banking model, or how did the Nazis roll into the breakaway civilization? He does a lot on the secret space program, and he's absolutely brilliant. And what happened to me was I was an investment advisor, and Joseph was the only. When I tried to explain to the people who were doing shows related to the stock market and the financial system, they couldn't incorporate the black budget. And the covert side of the economy was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you couldn't explain what was happening in the financial system by using the official reality. And so what I discovered is, even though Joseph's expertise is patristics and theology and ancient history and all these other things, he was better on the financial system than the financial guys because he could integrate all the information related to the secret governance system and science. He's very good on science. And so he and I worked more and more closely together. And he's had a very profound impact on me because one of the things he taught me was we can't save the government necessarily, but we can save the culture. And when he said that, I had no idea, Danny, what that meant. It's like, I'm an investment banker. How do you save a culture?
Right,
I don't know what to do. And he really got me to understand the power of each one of us. I knew about this financially, but each one of us in our personal lives, building the culture that we want to live in. And doing it with all of our time and money. And anyway, so we've collaborated both on the cultural issues as well as the geopolitics and news. And I don't know any person. So he was also worried, as I was, about the plunder we're seeing in the government. And we've always known, as these guys plundered all around the world, that they've said they were going to come back and plunder North America. So he just published a book on Reconstruction after the Civil War because he wanted to warn people this is what plunder looks like. Okay. So anyway, but he's absolutely brilliant. And if you look at the content that you've covered on your podcast, there's no topic that you've talked about that he's not.
Right.
Has something, he has something fascinating to say about anything. The other thing I did with Joseph that was just a blast, and remember, we're constantly in cahoots, is Solari crowdfunded a digital organ for him.
A digital organ?
I was at his house one day, and I said, Joseph, you're not yourself. And he said, I just dealing with the content we deal with, it's depressing. And I said, well, what do you do for fun? He said, I love to play the organ. He plays the organ. And I said, well, why don't you go play the organ? And he said, I can't because all the churches, the insurance companies won't let other people use it now. So the churches won't let me play their organs. And I said, well, how much does it cost to buy an organ? And he said, well, you can get a digital organ. And I said, okay, well, we're going to do a crowdfund for a digital organ. And it was during the campaign in 2016. And literally there were about 200 people in the Solari network who crowdfunded a digital organ for Joseph. And it was like a whole process. We went through 3 phases. We had luncheons and meetings, and it became like a little cult. You know what I mean? It's like, you guys have an election, we're going to crowdfund and learn all about organ music.
That's
and
so
it was, so now I listen to a lot of organ music, and I travel around Europe going to great organ concerts. So I'm really into it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it is great. It's really, if you've ever been in a beautiful cathedral with organ music, it's like an electromagnetic healing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's really amazing.
I bet. I've never experienced it, but I can imagine.
Oh, you have to take your whole family. Go to Chartres, go to Mont Saint Michel when there's a great organ concert.
Isn't he a like a Orthodox priest or something?
He's Russian Orthodox.
He's Russian Orthodox.
And he's very devout. And he very, he takes his theology seriously. So I'm always getting yelled at because I'm Christian, but I'm not Russian Orthodox.
Yeah. That's interesting. So he ultimately has been writing about these breakaway civilizations forever.
Years. Yeah.
For years.
Years. Yeah,
And
he's been on it from the beginning.
Yeah, and his theory that these are somehow they come from the Nazis or something like this.
So take it back to about Admiral Byrd after World War II.
Remind me.
Okay, so Admiral Byrd took a force of a naval force down to Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
And
Is this Operation High Jump?
yes.
Okay.
And came back very quickly, having lost, I think, ships and men or something. But whatever happened down there, we got whooped. And so the question has been since then, because the Nazis were clearly down there, during World War II. But, and the Nazis never, if you look at the surrender, according to Joseph, the Nazis never surrendered. The German government surrendered, but the Nazis never surrendered. And we know Dulles was in Switzerland the whole time laundering money back and forth.
Right.
And the rat lines got a lot of money out. And so, and we brought 4,000 plus scientists, Nazi scientists, into the national security state.
Well, some people, or a guy who's been on this show before, he's a philosopher and a historian on this stuff, Jason Giorgiani, was explaining to me how essentially Dulles and the national security state funded the Nazis.
Yeah. So there's a wonderful book, I don't know if you've read it, Charles Higham, Trading with the Enemies. Mm-mm. And he literally describes people stopping, ball-bearing orders going to the U.S. military so that they could go to Germany to keep the tanks going. So you literally had a metastructure, whether it's Dulles in Switzerland moving money back and forth, or literally the American industrial establishment helping keep the German tanks going. So, you literally had a whole corporate infrastructure that was on both sides of the fight.
So I'm curious. So this breakaway civilization that we've been talking about of bankers, central bankers, and private military contractors, is there some sort of cohesive ideology that they entertain?
Not that I know of. So, and I think that is one of the reasons I think they're going to fail, because they don't, I have seen in different sections or spots a culture or a theology or a philosophy, but I've never seen in the overarching. And now what you've seen groups, you see some groups who are just, it's just mafia, it's just crime. So, I would say culturally, the reason the unipolar model failed was the culture failed.
For the United States.
For the United States. But if you look at what the groups who seem to have power positions globally, I think their culture will fail.
I don't think any of the world's superpowers have any sort of cohesive ideology, do they? I don't think China does. China?
I think China does, but it's weakened tremendously. And
maybe Russia is more so.
Russia probably has the best shot of anybody. And it's funny, the Russians tried to recruit me in 2005.
Oh, yeah?
And they had a whole speech about how they were building a great culture. And if you look at everything they said, or the fellow who was trying to recruit me said, and what they're doing, they seem to be, it seems, what he said seems to match what they're doing.
Why did they try to recruit you?
Well, I have a theory. I know
What's
what
your
happens, but I don't,
right.
Never know
for sure.
what.
Totally.
Okay, so I got I won't bore you. I was at a conference and outside of the country, and I got a very impressive guy who apparently was advising Putin, and he did a great job of trying to recruit me. And I just kept saying to him, nobody likes a traitor. You have to. You have to dance with the guy you came to the party with. And he said, they'll never trust you. They'll never let you back. I said, I know, but I don't care. I'm I'm an American, so you can't change that.
And this is
So-
when you were working for who?
This is 2005, before I'd settled the litigation. And I went home. I was working in Montana on a food project. So I'm in a ranch in Montana. I got home and I said, something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And they had tried to force me to settle, and I wouldn't. And the negotiation was just, I was like, you are going to pay me the money you owe me, and I'm not going to settle until you give me the money. And it got really mean. And they had pushed and pushed. It got mean and mean. And I think they really wanted to settle because they knew they were going to bring the mortgage bubble down. And I got home and I said, something's wrong. There's something I'm missing here. So I got online and researched, and I discovered that Russia and their wealth funds were the number 2 holder in the world of U.S. mortgage securities.
What?
Yeah. And I said, that was Fannie and Freddie were trying to get me out of town. That wasn't the Russians. That was Freddie and Fannie. And it was right after that they finally settled. They paid me the money.
Wow.
Right. And
that's crazy.
well, things, here's the thing. It's not the world's, when you look at things through money, things look very different than they do if you're right.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I think
it's
that
a
was
much more objective way of measuring all of the crazy stuff that you read about or hear about.
right. So I think it was just a way of getting me out of town, and because then they wouldn't have to pay me the money if I was a traitor. No, really.
Right. No,
right.
it makes total sense.
Right.
It makes total sense. Some of the craziest stories I've ever heard about, people being followed or spied on or intimidated, have been people that have suggested that this is not the U.S. government that's doing this. These are contractors that are doing. These are private organizations.
Well, a lot of the people who were following me, they're funded by the U.S. government, but they have
Yes.
contractors. But then the contractors have what I call stringers. People they just pay daily. It's gig work.
Enforcers.
No, it's just gig work.
Oh, okay.
You get an assignment on your smartphone that tells you to follow this person around for the day or something. But they're gig workers, and a lot of them are stringers. They've been they're like drug addicts, or and they're just making gig money.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I had the whole portfolio, all the way from a real government employee to a government contractor to stringers. So yeah. I've dealt with them all.
Again, going back to this idea of this breakaway civilization, some of the stuff that Farrell has talked about, is there what is they have ideas about genealogy and eugenics, and a lot of them are eugenicists and believe in this idea of this master race.
So I can only tell you what I personally experienced. But they do believe in bloodlines, and the notion of bloodlines is very serious and real. And they do believe, just like they believe in breeding racehorses or champion cattle, they do believe that some people are genetically superior to other people.
Right.
And that's part of the bloodlines. And I don't know a lot about, I only know what I've experienced, but I don't know a lot about it. What I do know is, one of the big unanswered questions I have is how much have they been doing genetic engineering of children all along? So, and I suspect they probably have been. So you saw the movie Hannah, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, see the movie Hannah. It's all in
really?
the movies,
Okay.
I remember in America, fact is fiction, fiction.
Well,
is
you've seen. I know you talked about the novel, the science fiction novel, Three Body Problem. I heard you talk about that.
right.
Which is basically the idea of this alien civilization coming here from another star system that has like 3 suns and they can't survive, and somebody contacted them somehow and let them know that we have a planet here and they're on their way here and they're trying to stifle all scientific innovation on the planet Earth. And so by the time they get here in 450 years, we can't develop technologically to be able to fight them off.
Right. So one of the things I believe, have you ever read Rings of Saturn?
No.
Nora Berglund. Oh, that's a book you should read. I can send it to you.
Okay.
It's when I first tried to buy it, it was $2,000, so somebody sent it to me in
Holy
PDF.
crap.
No, I think if you can't get it, I'll send you the PDF.
Yeah.
But Berglund was, I think he was at I can't remember I think it was NASA. He was an engineer. And when Voyager passed Saturn in 1980, they call it the thing in the ring. They saw what they thought was like a 70-mile-long plasma spaceship docked in the rings, and the theory was that it was getting energy from the ring. And that's when the mortgage fraud and the financial fraud exploded. And one of my hypotheses is, did they suddenly say we need as much money as possible to come up to that level of civilization? Because the theory, sort of the history of a more technologically advanced civilization, meaning a less, so it never works out well for the less.
Yeah.
So it's the same in Three-Body Problem. Crash course, how do we get up here? And one theory on the breakaways is, okay, that's a crash course to get us up to deal with the people who control the thing in the ring. I don't know if it's true, but if you read Popular Mechanics, they say the camera on Voyager magically shut down and, it's complete. Anyway,
Yeah.
But if you read Rings of Saturn, it's very...
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you believe that that we have some sort of alternative source of free energy that we've already figured out, or that somebody's already figured out, and they're keeping it secret from the world.
We have a subsidiary in the Netherlands, Solari Report. So I have a Dutch partner, and it's 50-50, myself and my Dutch partner. And that group, they do all our audio videos, extraordinary people. I met them because from 2010 to now, they've been doing conferences on breakthrough energy and the secret space program. And their breakthrough energy group is called Global BEM. It's up on the internet. You can see all their presentations. But
Global who?
BEM, B-E-M,
Okay.
Breakthrough Energy Movement
Okay,
is
got
what
it.
it stands for. And, they have a website and they publish all this stuff. And I participated in some of the conferences. But they've been gathering breakthrough energy inventors from all over the world regularly to talk about what's possible. I have two companies. One is Solari Report and the other is Solari Screens. I do an investment screen. And the money manager, one of the money managers we work with on Solari Screens, we have a fund. And he's been an investor for many, many years in a breakthrough energy company. So, and occasionally I'll talk to him about it. Now, I'm one of those people, science goes in one ear and out the other. So
Yeah.
you don't want to ask me about breakthrough energy, but, it's all available up on the internet. And if you know the story of Tesla, on down to the current, there's lots of documentation and evidence that we have a lot of low-cost forms of energy available.
Well, that's the crazy sort of paradox with the idea of, if they're building these, which we know they're building these, giant underground cities and military bases and, underground superhighways for some sort of government to be able to run, and for these people to survive in some sort of nuclear war event or something like this, that, eventually the diesel power that they're using to run those is going to run out of gas or run out of fuel somehow, and they're not going to be able to power those underground bases.
I have no idea how they're powering it, but it seems to me, they're doing it, whether it's nuclear energy or breakthrough energy. And also, if you look at the people, what they've said, once you can get solar farms up in the suborbital platform and shoot the energy down here. There's also all sorts of ideas about how if you can dramatically lower the cost of energy, that would make you want to have complete control. If you're running the planet, you would want to have complete control, because if everybody gets breakthrough energy on an out of control basis, you've got no way to control them. Right?
Yeah. And another crazy thing that I learned recently was that the Manhattan Project is now the Department of Energy. Like, they changed their names a bunch of times, and now they're the Department of Energy, who is the one
Really?
who, during the Obama years, Obama passed the law that they were going to ban incandescent light bulbs, and now we're on these LED lights that are much more low energy, blue light spectrum,
Right.
which is the same stuff you get from all these smart devices that like hijack your dopamine system and all this
Right.
crazy stuff.
It's all part of the Great Poisoning.
Right.
Right. So, one of my favorite Solari reports we ever did was with an attorney named Amy Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know who Lawrence Wilkerson was? He was chief of staff to Colin Powell. when Colin Powell was Secretary of State during the Iraq War thing. Anyway, and sometimes you'll see interviews with him as Colonel Wilkerson. He was worked over for the Joint Chiefs at DOD when Powell was there, and then went over to State with him. Anyway, but Wilkerson called me and he said, I just did a peer review. He was a professor in Virginia. He said, I just did a peer review on secrecy, a journal article on secrecy, and he says it's the best thing I've ever seen. He said, you're going to love it, but I can't tell you who wrote it, and I can't give it to you until it's approved. And he said, as soon as it's approved, I'm going to send it to you, and you want to jump on this. So I did. It was written by Amy Benjamin. She used to work at the Department of Justice. And she did an interview on how all these things have been engineered and kept secret. Because when you realize that there's been this whole parallel universe going on and you didn't know it,
Right.
it's like, how could this go on and me not know it?
Right.
And so part of what people have to grapple with is, how could this be happening and me not know? And Amy does an absolutely fabulous job of explaining how this was all engineered. And you have literally, if I were to make a balance sheet of the United States, I will tell you more than half the economy is black and secret. And so this thing is
More than half.
Yes, it's been. If you look at the organized crime money and the black money, it's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger our whole life. And it's now, and the way I got into all these topics, because when I tell you I had no interest in underground bases, I was just looking for the money. It's like, where is the 21 trillion?
Right.
Where's it going? And I just kept looking for the money. And what I discovered was this huge secret economy. And it was really funny. For many, many years, I had so many wars with the financial guys because they would say the dollar's going to collapse. And I said, no, it's not. It's not going to collapse because it's backed up by invisible weaponry, that makes sure it doesn't collapse. And it's not going to collapse because when you steal 21 trillion, you got lots of money. There's no reason to collapse. You're collapsing the people you're stealing it from, but you're replete. Okay, you're not going to collapse. The reason they're doing it is so they have no reason. They're resource rich. They're not going to collapse. So it was really sort of, I'll never forget, there's a famous show I did with Greg Hunter, who's sort of an ally of mine, who I very much, we have a very good friendship. And Greg was screaming at me. He said, I've had 30 of the most important financial people on this year, and they all say the dollar's going to collapse. You have to be wrong. I said, Greg, I'm right. The dollar's going to go up. It's going to go up strongly. And because I'm looking at all the stolen money.
Right.
And so he says, finally, I said, I'll bet you $1. He said, you have to be wrong. Every financial guy in the world, all these top guys are saying it's going to, I said, it's not going to collapse, it's going to go up. And he bet $1 and I made him pay me because it was up 12% by the end of the year. I mean, it's a big move. And it was Farrell. It was thanks to Farrell that I was working with that I could really, and I was working with some money managers too, but you have to, if you're going to look at the economy, you have to look at the whole thing. And if the secret part is as big as the overt part, you have to look at it on an integrated basis.
Yeah.
Which is hard because it's hard to get reliable intelligence, as you
Right.
know.
Yes.
But that's where the unanswered question comes in, and you have to just frame it.
Now, how does, when it goes, coming back to energy, solving the energy problem, how does this idea of depopulation solve that?
Well, here's the thing. If you look at the control grid, it's very, there are two things that are unbelievably environmentally damaging. Okay. You have a global population of 8 billion people. If they all want to come up to a level of per capita spending and mineral and other resource uses as the West, enormous environmental pressure. Where are you going to get all the minerals to build those roads, have that many cars,
Yes.
et cetera?
Yes.
Okay. So you're talking about enormous environmental pressure. That's number one. Number two, if you can institute breakthrough energy, then they're all going to want to have 10 kids, right?
Yeah.
More environmental.
Lifespan is going to
Right.
get longer.
So you solve that by control grid, but the thing that is the most energy wasteful of all is the control grid. Bitcoin, 3 years ago was using more energy than Switzerland. right?
Really?
Yeah. In 2023, it was using like 140% of all the energy used by the Netherlands. Right.
Holy shit.
Well, but you look at the data centers. I mean, just Bloomberg had an article 2 months ago. If you look at the data centers planned for Texas, they need 30 new nuclear plants.
30.
30 by 2030 is what the article said. 30 new nuclear plants. And China's building nuclear plants, right and left. So the energy, this much data and managing and keeping data, because they're talking about putting sensors throughout the forests. You've got Internet of Bodies, Internet of Forests,
Right.
Internet of, you're talking about digitizing everything and collecting and managing the data using AI. The energy is enormous.
I had this gentleman on here a couple weeks ago who his first day on the job working for the NSA was 9/11. And he was explaining the sentiment and the sort of the vibe at the office that day. And he said that everyone was very optimistic about the future of the CIA now that they were going to be able to just gather data from people in heaps.
Right.
And now they're building these giant facilities out in Nevada and the mid
Right.
and New Mexico that are going to be these just to store just all this information and all this data collected by the
Right.
American people.
So I called the Patriot Act the Concentration and Control of Cash Flow Act of 2001. And it moved a lot of the black budget stuff on budget. But so DOD at that point was missing $4 trillion, but nobody cared. Suddenly they got a $48 billion increase the next year, and everybody was spending money. Mm-hmm. There was a Washington Post publication, I think it was in 10 or 12, called Top Secret America. And one of the journalists sat down and documented every national security installation or building that they could find that was built from the Patriot Act on. Mm-hmm. And it's just, you just wouldn't believe it. It's unbelievable. I mean, the waste is beyond imagination.
I think there's a quote from Kissinger where he said at one point, humans will eventually become useless eaters.
He's an idiot. Kissinger was always, and I knew him in New York because I was part of the Republican committee there. Jonathan Bush, the brothers. Yeah. Jonathan was a good friend of mine, and I used to help Jonathan raise money. And so Kissinger would be one of my favorite days in my life. I would frequent, so I'm an investment banker on Wall Street. I'm making a boatload of money. I'm having a great life. And I had a restaurant that I loved, and they had one table that was a banquette that was like the best table in the house. Mm-hmm. And I would always go there, and that was my table. And we would always confirm our reservations 3 times just to make sure there's no problem. And I had dealt a lot with Kissinger at some of the Republican luncheons, and Kissinger is, he could be the most narcissistic person on the planet. He was unbelievable. Anyway, so I'm standing in line right behind Kissinger, and Kissinger tells the maitre d', who's looking at me, I'm behind him, that he wants that table. And she says, I'm sorry, sir, that's reserved. I can't give it to you. And he's furious. He's just like, I'm Henry Kissinger. And she said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't give you that table. Anyway, so I'm with my client. And so he's mad, and she goes off and finally sits him someplace, but he's steaming. Mm-hmm. And she says, Miss Fitz, your table's ready. And takes me, and my client's looking at me like, who the fuck are you? And Kissinger across the room is like, I hate you. And I'm laughing my head off because it was just like,
oh my God.
Okay, Henry.
That is hilarious.
The girls won this one. My client was a female, so Henry was really pissed.
Wow.
Right, it was pretty funny. That was a great day.
That's fucking hilarious.
He was there's a story about Kissinger, and I don't know if it's true, that he's finally taken into the inner sanctum and he's given the books of all the classified information that the military knows about what's really going on. And it totally changed him because he was like, okay, we can't tell anybody.
Really?
Yeah. So
I always imagine like what that would be like to have that information in your head.
Well,
how would that affect you?
I don't know. I have tried. If you look at all the paranormal phenomena on this planet, I've tried to understand it and figure it out. Mm-hmm. and I can't figure it out. But I've been through most of the material. Farrell and I did a great 2-hour interview called Who is Mr. Global? And we went through every different hypotheses.
What do you mean? Can you define Mr. Global?
It's the committee that runs the world. So
Okay.
there's a committee at the top that makes all the big decisions. And my nickname for it is Mr. Global. So the question is, who is Mr. Global, and why is Mr. Global doing what he's doing? Because when I look at a situation, I like to put myself in somebody else's shoes. Like if I was Danny and I was doing this, what would it look like from my point of view? And so I want to put myself in Mr.
Yeah.
Why is Mr. Global doing this?
Yeah.
What's Mr. Global's point of view? So anyway, Joseph and I went through and did Who is Mr. Global and why is he doing what he's doing? So we went through all the theories, but some of my favorite comments on the internet is they'll say, well, she worked at the White House and she knows, so she's not telling us. It's like, no, everybody at the White House is not sure.
Who's your best guess of who Mr. Global is?
I think you have intergenerational pools of capital, and right now they are over influenced by a cult. Yes, so I think you have interdimensional intelligence, which is operating demonic intelligence.
Interdimensional demonic intelligence.
Yeah. Yep. So I think this thing about good and evil is real, and I can't find it anymore. I found it once. There were in the 1930s, a British physicist got up and said, we are being manipulated, but from other dimensions by intelligent beings from other dimensions. So I think if you study Christianity and you read the Bible, you're dealing with both divine intelligence and demonic intelligence. And I think too much of the leadership has gotten deeply involved in the occult and demonic kinds of intelligence.
Wow.
So I just read a book, and I have no idea. So I've tried to find every theory to explain the paranormal stuff. So I'm not telling you this is true, but I just finished reading a book called Final Event by Nick Redfern. I don't know if you've ever read it. And he describes it's a exploration of a group of military intelligence in the United States called the Collins Elite.
Oh yeah, I've heard about the Collins Elite. Yeah.
And they came to believe that the ET phenomena was a demonic phenomena. It was not people from another planet. It was demonic intelligence.
It was biblical stuff.
Right. And one of the things he discovered was that, or the Collins Elite apparently discovered, is in many sort of ET abduction events, if you called on Jesus Christ, it would stop.
What?
Yeah. That's what he reported. And he strikes me, I don't know anything about him, but it struck me as someone who was trying to do a faithful job of simply reporting what they found.
There's a lot of folks in the intelligence community that publicly state how they believe that the whole UFO phenomena is like this biblical thing. How it's angels and demons, and these things could be angelic entities, and like literal, like ground, like legitimate people in the intelligence community, whether they're still active or retired or whatever, that have been on podcasts that state they believe this.
So I am sure that all of that stuff is happening. So I think we are dealing with demonic and angelic forces in our world, and that's interdimensional intelligence. So the Bible calls it, demons and angels. Other people call it fifth dimension or whatever, but I think we're absolutely, and I will tell you what I think is the most important thing to understand about the universe. So write this down. This is my favorite. My favorite new book is A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple.
Oh, yeah.
99% of the material in the universe is plasma. Our universe is made up of plasma. And I used to hear that David Bohm said this, and other physicists as well, but Temple's really documented and nailed it. And I'm sure he's right. Plasma is alive and it's intelligent. And that means life is alive and intelligent.
Plasma or dark matter?
Plasma.
Plasma.
But, let me make it simple. The universe is alive and intelligent.
Sure.
And we share intelligence with all life. You know, so in the Lord of the Rings, when the trees show up to help, that's real.
Right.
So life is alive, and the notion that you can take digital technology and control it centrally, once you understand that, is so ridiculous. Only a demonic intelligence would come up with that plan.
Huh.
Right?
Have you noticed this recent phenomena of, and there's been articles written about it, of essentially a lot of big shots in Silicon Valley are mapping Christianity now onto everything that's going on in Silicon Valley. There's a new church in Silicon Valley that everyone's going to. Peter Thiel and the head of this company called Y Combinator are, Peter Thiel is a, famous billionaire gay Christian. And the guy from Y Combinator is a big devout Christian. And they're holding these big conferences, and, all these folks in Silicon Valley seem to be now converting to Christianity, going to church. And it's just really interesting to me, because Silicon Valley is, historically known for being like anti-religion, right? Like it's not been a typical religious part of the world in history. These people are, a lot of people developing tech and developing, these social media platforms, transhumanism, and
I know nothing about it.
Yeah. There's been a lot of articles. There was an article in the New York Times that came out, I think the New Yorker. And it's really interesting to me that somebody like Peter Thiel would be somebody who's, very much tied up in the military industrial complex, the intelligence community.
I would say that there is a non-alignment between the teachings of Jesus Christ and what Peter Thiel and his companies are doing.
Yeah.
So,
but it makes me wonder though, why somebody like Peter Thiel would be so invested in promoting Christianity in Silicon Valley.
I don't know. I would need to understand a lot more.
I wonder if it has something to do with trying to bolster Christianity in the United States, or sort of revive Christianity in some sort of a national security aspect.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that there has been so much financial fraud and corruption that you have a real breakdown in productivity in the general population. And so, there is a vested interest, if you don't want to depopulate everybody, and getting everybody to be productive. And they're not going to be productive unless they believe in morals and have morals. So, our problem, the reason the unipolar model failed, in my opinion, is we're not agreement capable. And the leadership is not agreement capable, but now the message is the population, you don't need to be agreement capable. Mm-hmm. And when a complex society depends on the rule of law, or at least the appearance of the rule of law, you take away the ability to be agreement capable, and the society fails. Mm.
Yeah, if you look at other countries, and if you look at Russia, and you see, they have sort of this cohesive Orthodox Catholic religion. If you look at Middle Eastern countries, they are so religious and extremely religious to the point where they're willing to strap a bomb to their chest and die for their religion. We are the opposite of that. We are not. There's no sort of general religion or ideology or belief that ties us together in that aspect.
So one of the questions I would ask, I'm trying to remember. I have to look up and learn how to pronounce his name. Mo, Gawdat. He's Egyptian. He was the chief business officer at Google. Do you know him? Mm-mm. He wrote the book Unstressable or Happy. He discovered AI when he was at Google. Let's see, yeah, there he is. Guy?
Okay.
Yeah.
Mo Gawdat.
Wonderful, wonderful man. So he's an engineer. He was the chief business officer at Google, and then he discovered and worked with AI. And his immediate reaction was to quit and completely change his life. Mm. And one of the things he said is, if you look at how quickly the IQ of AI is growing.
Yeah.
and how far as a processor it is surpassing us, you realize we better hope that it's learning a moral culture from us, that we're teaching it morality. Because if we don't, we're in real trouble. And I think dealing, his reaction to AI has been that which I've seen from others, which is to say, the most important thing is not my smarts, it's my values. And I've got to revisit and invest in rebuilding my values.
Yeah, well, like going back to like the theme of this conversation, morality is something that you can see like it's very much tied to culture and the United States, the population of the United States, the citizens of the United States. But when it comes to this decentralized, this sort of breakaway government or whatever you want to call it, it's almost like they can only exist without that. If you have other countries that are willing to, like I've had multiple people on this show who have been a part of various intelligence or have been a part of the United States intelligence community for a long time and have dealt with other intelligence communities of other countries around the world, whether it be Russia, Soviet Union, or Israel. And it seems to be at least within the, not saying the intelligence community is this detached breakaway civilization, but the only way to get things done in this underworld of intelligence is to bypass morals. It's to weigh the good, it's to weigh basically what's worse in order to achieve our objective. Like, we're willing to do whatever it takes to achieve the objective, although we will do the thing that's the least worse. And you hear stories of, some of the like insane human atrocities and, things that have been done with people in the intelligence community overseas, on black operations during wars and these kinds of things. And I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that the only way on this global scale of nations, if you want to be the most powerful nation state on planet Earth in this anarchistic global battle that these nations are fighting, you can't be tied down by morals to get ahead.
So let me describe it this way. There are two ways to get power in this world. One is to amass force, whether it's financial force, legal force, physical force, but ultimately it comes out of a gun. And power on planet Earth is run out of a gun.
Yes.
It comes from force. There's another way to get power, and that's from righteousness. In other words, if you have the power to call on divine intelligence, not just as an individual, but as a group, and you have the ability to make and keep contracts across time and space and communicate across time and space, freely and openly. If you go read the Bible, that's the story of Gideon. That's the story of Jericho. There's another way to get power. And ultimately, 8 billion people operating that power is more powerful than all the bombs and the demonic force. And they know that. That's one of the reasons they don't want us to know that, to come to that power. But, you have to understand, I don't know if did you ever read Ingo Swann? He's got a great book on power.
Yeah, I haven't read the books, but I'm familiar with them.
You read his book on power. But
Ingo Swann was a Scientologist.
Ingo Swann was a remote viewer.
And a Scientologist.
Right.
Yeah.
And but he was what do they call it? They called Leonardo da Vinci the same thing. He was one of those people who's sort of a genius.
A polymath.
Yeah, polymath.
Yeah.
And anyway, but there is another way to get power. And if you train a population to operate without morals, you make them powerless.
So you think like a one world religion would be ideal?
I think a one world religion would be a joke. I mean, I just,
it seems that religion has been throughout history the number one source of death and war.
Well, organized religion misused. Mm-hmm. So, true religion has been the source of many great things. So,
Right. I guess my point was just like if you're going to separate, like this is the conundrum. This is the paradox of it. If you separate morality and government, you can't be the most powerful government, right? And it seems like this.
Yes, you can.
You think?
I'm absolutely sure.
It seems like we're in this like weird self-fulfilling prophecy.
You have to. There's a one. Did you ever watch the TV series Yellowstone?
Yes.
So I'm a huge Taylor Sheridan fan.
Okay.
Just a huge shirt.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I don't know if you remember the second season where the big issue is what are we going to do about the Beck brothers? Right?
Okay.
Okay. And so they have to come up with a way of legally killing the Beck brothers because they got to kill them.
Right.
There's nothing. And the son corners one of the Beck brothers on, in the bathroom right before he shoots him. And he says, why do you make us do it? Why do you, why did you force us to kill you? And the guy says, because nobody ever fights back. And the son says, we do. Bang, you're dead. And then he goes and sits on the porch with his dad. And his dad says, the trick is to be more evil than evil so that you can stop evil and protect your family, but still love your family, enjoy a sunset.
Right.
So the question is, how can I outwit and defeat great evil and still have the capacity to love? That is the question.
That is the question.
And a great moral government can do that, but you have to be prepared. So probably shouldn't say the story. My sister, a group of people many years ago was trying to get me to run for president in New Hampshire, not because I had a chance of winning, they're just to bring disclosure, to get people to understand what was going on. So, and I absolutely refused. I said I had nothing to do with it. So my sister called me and she said, well, okay, let's just pretend you're willing to do it. What would we have to get for you to be able to do it? I said, you would have to give me 250 licenses to kill, no questions asked. And she's a lawyer. She said, that is the most unethical, immoral thing I've ever heard. I said, how am I supposed to run an organized crime syndicate unless I have the ability to enforce?
Right.
Right. So she thought that was unethical. I didn't think it was unethical. She asked me what I needed to do the job effectively. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
In order to survive.
No, in order to do a good job at the job. So if you're going to stop evil, you're going to have to use force. And you're going to have to use it wisely. And you're going to have to use it well. But you're going to have to use it. Because you're dealing... What was it? What was that great scene when Jack Nicholson is the president and he's talking to the aliens and he says, why can't we just all get along? And they kill him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But this is like, then you get into like, if you want to use another example of this paradox would be like what's going on in the Middle East with Israel and the Muslims, right? And the Israel-Palestine thing. When I think there was just some lady who was, she was up for, I think she was up for the some position in the UN, right? Like the ambassador to the UN, and she was in front of Congress, and somebody asked her, like, "Do you think Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank?" And she goes, "Absolutely, Israel has a biblical right to the West Bank."
Then she hasn't read the ancient scripture. That's a bunch of hooey. Ask Farrell. Farrell.
Yeah.
I mean, Farrell has a PhD in patristics from Oxford, and get him to explain. It's all a bunch of hooey.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just an organized crime syndicate who's great at spin.
So how do you think we get back on the right path then? On this, where it seems like we're on this downward spiral right now.
We are definitely on a downward spiral, and we have to change the model. And what we focus on at Solari. So if you come to Solari, we have something called the Building Wealth Curriculum. I told you to go take a look at it.
Yeah, I watched it.
I think we have to decide, do we want to be free or do we want to be in the control grid? And so we're going to have to slow down and stop the control grid. And there are many things you can do. So we have several big pieces on how to work with your state legislature and all the things the state legislature can do under the Constitution to protect the Constitution and to stop the control grid. Okay, and I think that's one thing. The other thing is, if you look at how many of us are financing the control grid, supporting the control grid, supporting the people who are implementing the control grid, or going to work and implementing ourselves, we can all just stop doing that. And so that's another thing we can do. And we have it's an article, I want to stop CBDCs, what can I do? So we have a fantastic amount of information. But then I also think each one of us can go to work in our own life, because this is control and freedom happen one person at a time. And what you can do is make sure you and your family are controlled, that you're free, but you use your time and money to do things that help other people be free. Because you and I can't be free unless everybody else is free. It's an all or nothing thing. So we have to grow and adopt a culture where we're getting our power not from a gun, but we're getting our power from righteousness. And we are doing things that help our family be free, like protecting them from the great poisoning. I mean, you, Danny Jones, should be doing everything in your family to make sure your water, your food, your whole way of life is protecting your family from the great poisoning. And there are many, many things you can do to do that, especially because you live in a very beautiful place. But and so we have to live our lives and live our lives where we adopt and support the culture that is healthy and help those around us do the same. And if you come into Solari, that's what our whole Building Wealth curriculum is about. And all of our political action, we've invested extraordinary money in the last 2 years trying to help state legislatures do those things under the Constitution they can do to slow down and stop the control grid. We can stop it. We still have time to stop it. So
you're optimistic about this?
I'm optimistic that it's possible. I'm not... If you look at how many people are just going along with it, it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because the number one criticism I've gotten over the last year is I'm critical because I'm not supporting the president. And my attitude is, if the president is implementing a digital control grid, no, I'm not going to support him on that, And, it's not personal. I want to be free.
Sure.
Right. So... And I think a lot of people, I've always told everyone, look, you can't, the federal government is financially dependent on the bankers. You can't implement real change inside the federal government. I mean, you can implement some, but the kind of change we need are millions of people saying, no, we won't go into the control grid. I mean, if tomorrow everybody got up and just 10% pulled their money out of JP Morgan Chase and said, we don't want to be controlled whether by CBDCs or stable coins, it would rock the world.
It seems like things are getting harder for the younger generations to do anything nowadays, especially with like interest rates going up. People can't buy houses,
Right.
People can't afford to borrow money. Universities, the job market, who knows what the job market's going to look like in 10 years with AI.
So there are solutions to all of that. I mean, if we were to change the financial liquidity on the ground, we could make things wonderful for the young people. And the young people could, build companies and lead us out of this. So we could revive Main Street. The money is there and the ability to do it is there. I mean, that's all possible. But it starts with recognizing the way we're going isn't going to work. And you have a group of people who are using the federal budget to centralize power. So what I can show you is the federal budget, the vast majority of money. I can't tell you what the waste is like. So, for example, back to the foreclosed properties at HUD, I would find neighborhoods where we were spending $250,000 per unit to build public housing, where $50,000 would buy and rehab a foreclosed property in the FHA properties. So we could get 4 or 5 homes for the price of one.
Wow.
But they wouldn't change it because when I took the material to the woman who was the special assistant, the guy who ran the public housing program, she said, but how would we generate fees for our friends? The entire federal budget is
Right.
engineered around fees for our friends. And I don't see anything being done to change that.
No.
But we could change that because you can't, if you look at the laws that apply to financial management, I mean, the laws are all there if we implement and enforce them. So this can be changed.
Well, thank you. This has been fascinating. I'm going to have to go back and watch this podcast like 2 more times to fully understand it.
Okay. Well, I'm happy. I sent you a lot of homework before we did this. I'm happy to
Yes.
send you more homework.
Yes. Oh, I would love that. Thank you
Okay.
very much. And
Okay.
then the links are the solaryreport.com. Is that it?
Yeah.
And
So-
then what was the other one?
Solari screens, but just go to Solari. Everything branches off of Solari.com.
Okay. Beautiful.
Thank you, Danny
No,
Jones.
thank
It's
you,
been a real
Catherine.
pleasure.
It's very nice to meet you. And I'll link everything below. And we have some Patreon questions if you don't mind asking them. We have some Patreon members that have some great questions for you. So we'll wrap up the podcast now.
Okay.
And then we'll go hit a couple of those.
Okay.
That's all, folks. Good
Okay.
night.